What is happening, everyone? Welcome to the Knights of Last Call. If you're new here, you may not recognize that little jam that just bust out, but that was the Night School theme song. Remember the Night School theme song? That
oh yeah, I remember Ben wrote it.
Yeah, that Ben wrote for us. Yeah. So that was a blast
Back
from
in
the
the day
past.
when I was learning
Back
how to even do a dungeon.
Blast from the past. Omniscience as well. This is a much higher energy intro. Yeah, that was our night school intro. If I had time, I would have found like the little video clip, right, with the.
Oh, it was like a backpack or something?
It was like a backpack and like school bells ringing, and then
Yep.
the thing came in.
Yeah, it was legit. Ben did a good job.
Yeah. It was back when we cared.
I mean, I was learning a lot back then. Now I'm over here running games for patrons. And all sorts of
I
stuff.
know we've come so far, Bob. I mean, what are we even doing here?
I know I wore the shirt too.
I know. Did you see that I think it was GM Setso wore that shirt to a Browns game?
Did he really?
Yeah,
I did not know.
Which is great
That's
because
fantastic.
obviously it looks like a Browns shirt, right? Because it's got the kind of orange and white. But then it's just so great because all it says is, "What are we even doing here?"
Especially because they got rocked last week, and it's like, "What are we even doing?"
Oh, exactly. So, well, welcome everybody. So we are doing this today. Well, number one, because I like hanging out with my good buddy, and I love talking RPGs. But we had a tip goal last week or 2 weeks ago, and it was to bring Bob on, and to sort of do a kind of another type of look at game systems, and find games that maybe Bob was interested in, because Bob's like all of you. He tunes in for these first looks or these deep dives and kind of says, is this the next game I want to that I'm interested in, that I want to get to learn how to play?
I'm like all you. I started with a little D&D, a little Critical Role. I was like, oh, maybe I should upgrade to Pathfinder. Whoa, too strong, Bob, too strong. And then I find these other games, and I'm like, these are really interesting. And obviously the game we're going to talk about today was one that you've talked about a lot. I loved your campaign you did with some of our friends. I know some of the people on the Patreon play it. I tried to play it a couple times, and I was busy, so I wasn't in it a lot. And I'd love to learn more about it because I feel like I don't know enough about it. And obviously, it won March Madness Nights of Last Call March Madness Award. So
was that this year or last year?
This year.
Last year was
Pathfinder 2.
Pathfinder 2. Okay.
Yeah, Pathfinder 2, one of the first year we did it. This year, Blades in Dark one.
Yeah. So, and so in a sense, this is kind of an opportunity for me to, to talk with Bob. And obviously it's totally random. We picked Blades in the Dark last week before the deep cut got released on Saturday. And we were in the middle of that daylight savings time stream. And I went, okay, let's take a quick look. And that turned into an hour and a half of me looking at, at new stuff. But, yeah, I think what we're going to try to do with some of these series is bring Bob on. We could talk about the game and try to teach Bob, and maybe you can learn as I teach Bob. Bob can ask great questions, and then also we could take Bob through character creation process, so you get a kind of a feel for what that is like as well. Let's see what we got here. Grim Prism says Bob in the dark. Gonzo said this should be fun. Bob going to night school with Professor Melinda on a PVTA inspired game. KC asked, what was the impressions of the new Blades in the Dark supplement? Mixed, KC. Overall, I think it's very interesting, but there are some things there that I think fundamentally change and shake up. And I should note that tonight, when we're talking about all these rules mechanics, I'm mostly going to be focused on what core Blades in the Dark is, and not really getting too deep into the weeds on some of these alternative modules that John Harper just released, because, I think that'll muddy the waters a bit too much. Casey wanted to know, how late did we go? We went to the first 2 a.m. So I officially, the stream ended at 1 a.m., but that was after it jumped back to 1 a.m. So it was a 4-hour stream. Pathfinder says time for night school. Satir says hello. How are the nights doing? Tonight, how are the nights tonight? The nights are good.
Nights are good.
Gorgeous day here. Almost near a record high.
Too hot.
Record high.
They didn't put the AC on at work. It was like 77 in my work. I had like a long sleeve. I was dying. I was like, why do we not have the AC on? I know it's November, but like, come on. It's so hot.
It's crazy, Toss. Cephalopod says, hey, Derek. Hey, Bob. Hey, Knights. Hello, Cephalopod. Welcome.
Steph, she played in my Dragonbane game, so she's gonna be in part 2.
Oh, nice. Oh, the what's it called?
I assume that's the same. I assume that's Cephalopod from our channel.
Yeah.
Not like some other.
I don't know if there's other cephalopods. The what's it called? Grim Hollows, or what is it called?
Shadows over Gloomshire.
Gloomshire. I thought it was like Grim something.
Shadows over Gloomshire.
Yeah.
So we did that. I did, and if you are not a member of the Patreon, you don't even know about that, because I filmed a Halloween special. It was supposed to be a one shot, but as you guys know, one shots never are one shots. Even though I ran for 5 hours, there were still probably 2 more hours of playing, and we're gonna do that next week. We're gonna finish part 2. So just for fun, run the last part. They ended it in a good spot, and they did a great job. I think everyone had a great time. But there were some things in there that aren't the core Dragonbane experience, and I'd like to provide some of that if I can. And we'll run that, and then I think I'm going to do. I think it's called like end of was it road something at the end of the road or something like that. The next one I'll run for the Patreon.
Yeah, awesome. Still loving Dragonbane?
I do. I haven't played it in a while, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be interesting. I hope I don't screw it up. And I was like, I remember why I like this. It's so simple.
Right.
It's so easy to kind of just play around. Everyone kind of just can just feel it out. And I've been really taken into some of the things that I've heard you talk about a lot, which is like something. And I think you talked about this on our channel the other day. Sometimes you don't need to make a roll. Like someone's like, I'm gonna do this. I'm like, yeah, there's no roll. Like it makes total sense that you could just do that. We're just talking about it. And I did that, I think, well in the game. A lot of times I was like, no, that isn't a roll. You just do it. And other times I was like, well, let's dig a little deeper. Let's make a roll, and if you do get it, we'll find out a little more information. So.
Yeah, I mean, say yes or roll the dice is kind of the default mechanism, and it's a useful skill to have for any game master because you have to strike a right balance. Because if you just say yes too often, then people start going, well, why do I have all these skills on my character sheet? And to be completely frank, that's like how old school games work, right? Like old school essentials and stuff. You don't have a skill list. So the whole game is just, hey, GM, can I do this? And they kind of go, yeah, maybe, yeah. Or they'll say, nah, no, roll something. Or they'll say, I'll say there's a 30% chance that you can succeed, and they'll just roll the dice. So you do have to strike somewhat of a balance. I think Dragonbane, though, just in general, is pretty intuitive with its D20, easy to give boons and banes. And, and at a certain point, right, like, I don't know, let's just imagine a situation where you're like, oh, that's a great idea. And you have like the perfect cover for that. And you have the bright supplies. You're like, I'm going to give you 3 boons.
Yeah, 100%. But
right. You could say yes. Right. But then maybe also you're screwing somebody out of rolling a nat 1.
Yeah.
Right. So there's kind of this weird, like sometimes you want to roll because the game wants you to roll. So you kind of can feel bad if you're like taking away those easy wins from people. So
there's a sense of
like
you've always talked about, like having like, and it's weird playing digital, but like grabbing the dice, like more dice. You're like, I could just say yes, you did it, and we just skip on. But a little something like grabbing, like I got like 4 20s here.
It's very, very, very satisfying. I mean, something that you've seen obviously happen in our games when I've running. Where it's like somebody goes to do something, and I go, oh, they are, like when we're obviously this last year we've been playing Forbidden Lands, right? Where somebody says something and does something, goes to pick up their dice, and I say, add 3 skill dice, because you this is so easy for you, or you have such a good advantage. You're in a perfect position. Yeah, Bob, you're in the top of the tower and they don't see you're there. Add 3 dice to your hunting check or whatever, to your shooting check. And you're like, yeah, that feels good to pick those dice up and add them into my pool. And that tactile element, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I loved it. And I think Dragonbane does a really good job. The only thing I will say is I don't know if Dragonbane's the best game for spooky horror.
Mirth and mayhem.
Yeah, at least maybe not the way I run it, because I like to just have fun, have some drinks, and play and goof off. And some of the people I play with are like that too. And so I know
what you're saying.
Seth did a good job. She was in character. She was playing it right. But we have Goal in the game, and he's always a goofball. Right. And that's kind of how I am. So I feel like I'd like tone my goofiness down to like try to be a little more serious. But Dragonbane is inherently so loose. So I had to balance that, and I hope they said I did a good job, so that was fine. But I don't know if they're like the best match for each other.
Sure. So it was like us playing Dread and Smith and Vin were playing 3rd edition D&D. How would you hack Dragonbane to advance stats? I don't know that I don't think that there's a need to advance stats.
No, but I think that they are going to come out with probably a Dragonbane Advanced at one point, right? That's what he was talking about. Maybe. I mean, you could, or something.
I mean, you could do it as a heroic skill, I guess. Right. But I mean, the only ones that you would really want to advance anyways, right, would be Constitution and Willpower. Oh no, I guess you would want to invent strength because that might get you that extra damage bonus.
Well, agility gets you help with evade.
Right, but agility just sets the base for evade, right? So like
Yeah.
once that starts.
Oh, that's right. You're
So
right.
even if
Yeah,
even if you were to pump up your agility after the fact, technically it wouldn't affect your evade, right? That's a skill. But agility gives you that bonus damage to range. Strength gives you that bonus damage to melee. Constitution's your hit points. Willpower is your willpower points. But then you have the 2 heroic abilities that give you more hit points. I guess sometimes you do have to make willpower checks and constitution checks.
correct, for fear.
Yeah, for fear and
rolls.
like poison or something like that. So, yeah. So really, the only 2 that suck are intellect and charisma, which is why in Dragontide.
I know. I was like, we knew this.
Which is why in Dragontide I wanted to buff those 2 stats. I wanted to make every stat important. Not necessarily.
Seth makes a good point. She was like, I love the campy horror feel. I did tell everybody before. I'm like, I feel like we're going for like Buffy the Vampire here.
Sure.
Like it's
yeah.
Campy horror is a good term.
Campy horror, and that's fine. That not every horror has to be like psychological edge of your seat thriller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was fun. So when I run part 2, it's gonna be great, and that's gonna be on the 10th. So like 5 days from now. So Sunday.
All right. So Bob, let's talk Blades in the Dark. So
this book, I actually own this book.
That's crazy.
And you could see with my bookmark that I'm on like page 5.
Right. Now I will
24. I'm on page 24.
I will criticize the book. It is very beautiful and it's nice, but it's not necessarily the most intuitively laid out because it's one of those situations where like they kind of talk about stuff in the beginning part of the book, but they don't really get into the details of it until later. And there's a lot of things that you get introduced to, but you may not necessarily understand how you're supposed to use it. So what we'll do today is, and I know you've played Blades, but it was a while ago and you may not have had the full context.
One session of a 3-shot. And so I was like, can you give me the 100-foot view of Blades?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So what we'll do is we'll talk about the core element of the mechanics of Blades, about how the narrative game works. You can ask any question you want. And then we'll talk about the characters and we'll talk about the character sheets. Or we'll talk about the character sheets and how characters are built after we talk about the mechanics. And then we'll try to build a character while we go through it.
Okay, sweet.
All right. So first things first, I sent you a Blades in the Dark rules reference sheet.
Yes, I'm looking at that.
All right. It's a 2-page document. So the very first page is the most important part of the entire game. All right. So Blades in the Dark is a dice pool system, right? Just like Forbidden Lands, right? So,
okay, perfect.
Yeah. So it uses just D6s. And when you go to take an action, much like any other RPG, if you're in a situation where your character, your PC, is doing something that is potentially risky or dangerous or could have fallout and consequences if you fail, right? Or if your success is not guaranteed, we're going to make a dice roll, right? To make it interesting, to make it exciting. And of course, this is no different than any other RPG. Now, as you know from playing some of these games, when you play D&D, you should, in theory, be doing the same thing, right? Making a dice roll when it's something's dramatic and on the line, and like your point about Dragonbane. Oh, that's easy. That's auto set. We're not going to roll the dice.
Yeah.
So Blades of the Dark works the same way, but the way it works is a little different. Is you're going to get a pile of D6s.
Okay.
And rather than trying to get successes or whatever, what you're going to do is you're going to roll that pile of D6 and you're going to find the highest value of that dice pool.
Okay.
After you rolled it. So you might roll 5 dice and you get a 5, a 3, a 2, a 1, and a 1. So in that case, that entire roll, you just take the highest die, 5.
Okay.
So no math, you're just looking for the highest die, right? So if you, obviously, higher is better. And the more dice you roll, the better chance you have of rolling a 6, or a 5 or a 4. So more dice in your pool is a good thing, right? So what is success? So how is that any different than, D&D? Well, the first thing to realize is that like Powered by the Apocalypse, there are 3 levels of outcome in Blades in the Dark. So there's again, this game is derived from Powered by the Apocalypse. So we know in Powered by the Apocalypse, right, you have your 10 or higher is you do it. Yeah. And if you roll a 6 or lower, there's a problem that generates. And then if you roll a 7, 8, or 9, it's this kind of like you succeed, but there's also a problem.
Yep.
Right? Well, Blades of the Dark is built on that DNA. So that same thing is done here.
It's just basically halved.
Yeah. So the way it works is if we take a look at, say, let's go ahead and take a look at the risky box. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So you're in a situation, you're going head to head, you're acting under fire, you're taking a chance. This is a risky action. Okay. This is the default action in Blaze in the Dark, a risky action. If it wasn't risky, we probably wouldn't be doing it. Right.
Correct.
Right. So you roll your pile of D6s, right? It's going to be probably between 2 to 4 or 5 dice, depending on how much you add to it.
It's just based off a skill that you have or something?
Yeah, it's called an action, and there's 12 of them in the game. And so we basically say, which action do we think this represents? Okay, if you're fighting somebody, there's like I think there's a skirmish skill, so
Okay.
you would roll that. No, it's called action rating, but yeah. And that action ratings are rated 1, 2, 3, or 4, and that's how many dice you roll.
Okay.
Now, we roll that pile of dice, we find the highest die. If we get a 6, we did it. Right? You do it.
Okay.
If the highest die you roll is a 4 or a 5, you do it, but there's some sort of consequence, right?
Gotcha.
So you succeed. So what that means is on a 4, a 5, or a 6, you did it. But there may be a consequence, but if you roll full 6, you don't have any consequences. And if you roll a 1, 2, or 3, that's when things go badly, right? You could suffer a complication, harm. You could end up in a worse position than you were in before, right? You lose this opportunity. So Blaze in the Dark still has this idea that if you roll a 1, 2, or 3, you eventually failed. But it's never just like, you failed, nothing happened, right?
Okay.
It's always, and this happens, right? There's always some sort of consequence. It could be
so it is a little PBTA, but there's a little bit actually more to it, I guess, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, because in PBTA, if you roll a 1, 2, or 3, or if you roll a 6 minus, it's the GM makes a move, and the GM move can be kind of whatever they want it to be. But in this game, the default assumption is that if you roll a 1, 2, or 3, things do not work out for you. And,
Gotcha.
But it's never just like now, and this is where a lot of Blaze in the Dark GMs, if you're ever running a Blaze in the Dark GM game, Bob, get into a trouble. Is they call for a die roll, and then the player rolls their dice. Maybe they don't have that many, but maybe they roll maybe they're unlucky, and they roll a 2, a 2, and a 3. So the highest they rolled is a 3. So now things have gone badly, right? And the person suffers some harm, right? Like kind of think of it as like taking damage, or a complication occurs, or and the GM called for a roll. The player rolled. They roll a 3, and then the GM goes, I don't actually know what consequence. I actually don't know what could have gone wrong here, right? Like the game is saying you need to do some harm to the person. You need to put a complication in their life, and you're like, I don't know what to do. And part of the thing is, maybe you should have thought about that before you asked for a die roll. If you can't think of what would be the consequence or what would be the fallout of you failing this roll, then you probably shouldn't be asking for the roll. Does that make sense?
Or I hope that your players are mature enough that we can work together to come up with something.
Absolutely. And also, too, I think it also...
our group would be like, yeah, we all know. We killed ourselves.
Yeah, and the other thing is, though, it can actually be very beneficial to talk that out before the player even rolls.
Oh, that's a good idea,
right?
Yeah.
Because in this game, it's important sometimes to know, hey, what am I risking? I'm taking a bet. I feel like for me to make an informed choice, I kind of need to know what's on the line here. And that might inform, maybe I go, maybe I'm not going to do that, or maybe I'm going to try something else, right? So there's this idea of communicating with the GM, and the players can go back and forth, like, what are the possible negative consequences of this action, right?
I like that.
So it's kind of like PBTA in that respect, where you could basically have 3 tiers of outcome. You either do it with no costs, no consequences, you just did it. Or you do it, but there's some sort of negative consequence. Or you didn't do it, and there's some more intense negative consequences. All right.
Now, does the game have suggestions for consequences, or is it really? It's up because it's so situational.
It's so situational. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's some people just develop some some quick rules that quick heuristics that they can use that make it easy if you can't really think of something. It's easy just to say if you're if you're in a sword fight, and somebody gets hurt, it's like, just give them some harm, or whatever like that. They get a little cut up or whatever. But yeah, a lot of times because it's very tied to the fiction, You know, you want whatever's happening to make sense in the context of the fiction.
I've always had the best time, I think, asking the players like their thoughts. Like I've seen really good when you've started talking about things, and Smith, our friend Smith, will say something. I'm like, oh, that makes total sense. And you're like, oh yeah, totally. That's exactly what's going to happen because I don't know. There's something about that. I don't know if it's ownership, but it just feels like it's so natural to everyone's sort of collaborating, and the player sort of is expressing this is probably what would happen to my PC here. We're like, well, we all agree, and it does. And so I hope that if anybody else is running this, that you do that. You don't just think that you have to carry the whole burden, though it is nice if you can come up with something very clever and good on the spot. But
Blades in the Dark and games like it work a lot better when you have that sort of collaborative atmosphere. And, you know, there's some players who, and there's nothing wrong with this, right? They like it when there's kind of an adversarial
makes it more interesting
tone between the GM and the right. Like, I'm not saying that they're the bad guy, but there's this idea of like, hey, look, I don't want to feel like I'm trying to, you know, lobby against myself, you know, because then it puts me in a weird
play with us,
you know, whereas like for us, our group, right. And we've talked about this on this channel before. We tend to have a lot of people who are very, authorial stance, right. Where we're looking at it as these are my characters in this book or this movie. And, you know, they're my character, but I don't really care what happens to them, right? I just want something. I want to twist the knife. I want to see.
Yeah, it's something interesting to happen.
Right.
It's
I want
boring if they just walk through everything.
Right. So, and so if I gave you the choice of, hey, do you want nothing to happen to your character and have it be really boring? Or do you want something to happen to your character, but it might be bad? Right.
For sure. But something interesting.
Right.
And if it's bad, we'll deal with it.
Correct. And so for some people that can be kind of a weird state to put themselves in. And we'll get actually further into this when we talk about devil's bargains. But where Blades in the Dark is different than Powered by the Apocalypse. In Powered by the Apocalypse, you either roll or you don't roll, right? Like that's it. You know, when you roll, it's the same every time. 10 or higher, you did it. 7, 8, or 9, you did it, but there's a consequence. 6 minus, the GM makes a move. But Blades in the Dark has this idea called position. All right. And if you scroll to the top of the rules reference, you can see that there's this column that we're in is called position, right? And there are 3 positions. The first is called controlled. And then there's risky. And then
we talked about.
There's desperate. Okay. Now, each of these, if you look at the 6, now remember, there's no DCs in this system, right? There's no difficulty class. There's no like target number. You know what I mean? Like,
do you take or add dice depending on difficulty?
Not really, no.
So really, it's like no matter how difficult it is,
right?
What about something? I guess.
Well, think about
if something doesn't make sense, you just can't do it.
Well, right. I mean, like if you say I'm going to blow up the moon with my gun, right? You say, well, you can't do that. You know, if you say if you say I'm going to open the door to the bar, you say, okay, you do that automatically, right?
Yeah. Okay.
But if we're rolling,
it's logical,
right? But like think about Powered by the Apocalypse, right? There was no DCs in Powered by the Apocalypse. If your character wanted to trick somebody, it was roll the dice and we'll find out, right? Like, and so from a gradient perspective, you either basically have no, that fails. Yes, that succeeds, and then in between it's roll the dice, right? So there's no idea of a DC, but what Blades in the Dark lets us do is sort of determine based on what's happening right now in the game world, not how likely we are to succeed. That doesn't change, but if things do go bad, how bad do they go?
Gotcha.
Okay? So if you look, you can see that. Whether so controlled, right? Think about this in the sense of position is, what's your position here? You know, you're going in for a raise. You know, are you desperate and you've got no leg to stand on, or are you like they need me more than I need them? I have all the receipts. I know exactly what I'm doing. They just lost their main guy. I am in a dominant position, right?
Yeah.
Well, the same thing is true in Blades in the Dark. Whenever you're in this situation where we're going to be making a dice roll, what we determine is what position in the fiction is your character in. So they could be, you know, they could be in a dominant position acting on their own terms, or they could be risky, or it could be desperate.
And risky is like the default?
Risky is the default. It's the one in the middle.
Okay.
And if you look at all 3 of them, you'll see that on a 6, you do it. And on risky, you do it. And on desperate, you do it. So success looks exactly the same. What's different is when you roll a 4 or 5 or a 1, 2, or 3.
Gotcha.
As the situation gets more desperate, the consequences become more severe. Right? So to use an example, let's say that your character was posted up in a bell tower and was going to sniper shot somebody down on the street below, and you have like concealment and all this other stuff. And the GM says, "Oh, you're definitely acting in a controlled position." Right? Let's say that you roll low. Well, what's the worst, what's going to happen to you? Are you going to get blown up by a cannon? No, that doesn't make any sense, right? Maybe the worst thing that happens to you is somebody sees you, right? You miss the shot, and there's like one kid on the street who looks up and sees you, right? Before you're able to duck under street. It's a consequence, but it's pretty minor.
Yeah, I don't see the word harm here, so
there's lesser harm, but it's very, very minor, right? So again, the idea of the controlled roll is if you're in that position, and by the way, how do you get to controlled roll? Easy. You and the GM are talking, you're having a conversation. And when we get to this point of making a roll, sometimes there's a conversation that happens between the GM and the player, and maybe the other players as well, right? Like, well, I don't know, in this situation, these people are looking for an assassin, and you're like, that's true. Okay. They're expecting this hit to happen. I could see why this isn't controlled. It might be risky, right? Because there's a bunch of people looking around, and maybe they're armed. Whereas if it's like this person has
they're on alert.
Yeah. If this person has no idea, but you're like, no. Remember, we convinced his group that was all just like nonsense. And so I'm like, you're right. He doesn't believe that he's in any danger. In fact, he's making a show of how he doesn't care. So he's actually kind of being, throwing caution to the wind. You're right. You have the control position. There's this discussion that occurs between the GM and the player and the players to kind of decide how risky is this. So that's controlled. Now imagine the opposite, right? You're on a street and there's 3 people armed with knives and clubs that are charging down the street. You've got your rifle in your hand, unloaded, and you're trying to quickly jam in around and cock it and shoot one of these guys at point blank range before they close and start killing you, right? That's a much more desperate position, right? And you can easily see where if you roll low in that situation, the consequence is going to be, some kid on the street notices you, right? It might be they beat you to death, and they leave you for dead, you know what I mean? Or they, rip you apart. So when you're in that desperate position, your chance of success isn't worse. It's just that if things go bad, they go real bad. And this is important because Blades in the Dark, your characters, in D&D, if we say something is in a desperate position, usually you're thinking, the DC is higher.
Yeah.
And that means you're less likely to succeed.
Correct.
But in Blades in the Dark, even if the situation's really desperate, your chance of succeeding doesn't change.
That's why I was actually wondering, because it's dice pool, if you added or subtracted dice, it's like increasing the DC or the odds.
And you don't. And the reason why that's interesting is because in Blades in the Dark, then, your characters you're kind of encouraged to take gambles and take risks. You could do that in D&D, but you are playing kind of stupid, right? Because like if you're like, well, I need to roll an 18 or higher, on a D20.
Let's do it.
So Blades in the Dark allows characters to get way in over their heads. Now, don't get me wrong. It might end up chewing up your character. It might end up causing a lot of problems and complications and fallout, but it doesn't affect your ability to succeed or not, right? And in fact, the game goes a step further. If you look next to Desperate on the left side, it says each time you roll a desperate action, mark a tick of XP. So,
is this like DB where you have a skill and it increases?
Yes, but you have like XP that you spend. So it's more like Forbidden Lands.
Oh, okay.
And you might only be earning, 4 to 6 XP a session. So every time you make a desperate roll, you get to mark XP.
Okay. So you're encouraged to sort of take risks.
You're encouraged to take risks. Now, that being said, I have seen players who play this game go, sick. I'm going to make out all my situations desperate as fuck because that way I get a ton of XP.
We pushed every roll in Forbidden Lands.
You push every roll. But then what ends up happening is you obviously aren't going to roll straight 6s all the time.
Yeah.
And eventually you're going to end up suffering a bunch of consequences and getting really chewed up. And then you might have players who go, this sucks. Like, my character's in bad shape and everything's terrible. It's like, well, yeah, because you kept pushing the envelope too much. You can do that, but there are going to be consequences, right? So the game doesn't let you kind of get off for free.
What's this last thing up here where it says 1d6 if you push yourself,
yeah,
or you accept a devil's bargain?
Yeah, so we'll talk about that next. So
okay.
So again, your action, it might be like prowl or skirmish or study, right? It's kind of like a skill. And you're going to have 1, 2, 3, or 4 dots in that action. So you're going to roll 1, 2, or 3, or 4 dice. Then, if somebody in your party is helping you out, you get an additional die, right?
Okay.
They explain how they're doing it. They give you an additional die. Now, we haven't talked about this yet, but there is a resource in this game called stress. Okay. And the idea is, right, your characters are scoundrels, right? They're kind of bad guys, right? They're criminals, right? Life on the streets is not easy. So whenever your characters really want to, do more, push themselves, it costs you stress. So stress is a resource that you kind of spend, or rather you acquire it. And if it gets too high, your character could basically have like a mental breakdown.
Is this kind of like Strife in Legend of the Five Rings?
It's very much like Strife in Legend of the Five Rings.
So you have to like unmask to help.
Well, in this game,
Strife?
yeah. So we're getting ahead of ourselves, but in this game, your scoundrel has a vice: women, gambling, drugs, drinking, the races, the horse track. And when you're between your missions, right? When you're between your heists, if your stress is really high, the only way your character can reduce the stress is by indulging in their vice.
Yeah, that checks out.
Because these characters don't have healthy, they don't have healthy ways of dealing with their problems, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is that the game is setting you up to say, hey, yeah, you can deal with your stress, but it's not in a pleasant way, right? It's in potentially a problematic way. So you can accumulate this stress, and one of the ways that you can accumulate it is one of your allies can spend 1 stress and give you a die. And of course, they have to be able to describe it in the fiction, right?
Yeah, it has to make sense.
It has to make sense. But it does cost them 1 of their stress points. You don't get to do it for free. So an ally can give you a die for 1 stress. Additionally, you could push yourself, which is basically you give yourself a die, but it costs you 2 stress.
Okay.
So basically, in the fiction, you're basically describing how, you pedal to the metal, let's fucking go. You kind of push yourself beyond your normal means, and it's stressful to do that, but you can get an extra die.
I assume you have a maximum stress threshold before you break or something?
Correct. For most characters, you have 8 boxes of stress, and if your stress boxes fill up, you suffer what's called a trauma.
Oh.
And then your stress resets to 0, but your character basically gains a sort of negative personality trait, right? You might become detached, cold, vicious, right? Like the streets have sort of chewed you up, and you're kind of becoming more and more hardened, more and more traumatized, right? And
I assume that's not easily gotten rid of.
It is not easily gotten rid of. And if your character ever accumulates 4 traumas, you have to retire them. So that's basically the way your character can die, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, there's other ways your character could be like, electrocuted or shot in the face, but like if you get to your 4th trauma, the idea is that, your character's not dead, but they are just so messed up that they're out. Maybe they just, they end up becoming a crazy person. They end up living on the streets. They're done. It was too much for them. Now,
but you see a lot of pushing in this, right? Because obviously you can do your vices between.
You can, but indulging your vice is not without its own consequences.
Okay.
And so you are right. And I've seen a lot of players push themselves a lot, and which is fine, but then you're going to have a lot of stress. And when you have a lot of stress, you're going to have to indulge your vice. And when you indulge your vice, it can cause a lot of problems for you. Okay.
Is there like a separate thing when you indulge? Okay.
Correct.
That's what I was getting at. How do you know that?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So the other option, which we have not talked about, is if you don't want to pay 2 stress to get a die, you can also accept a devil's bargain. Now, you talked about collaborative work between the players and the GM. The devil's bargain is basically a way for you to get an additional die, but it doesn't cost you anything. But something bad happens automatically.
After the roll.
After the roll.
Okay.
So, for example, let's say, let's go back to our sniper situation.
Okay.
We're up in the bell tower, and I'm getting my dice pool together, right? And maybe you've got 3 dots in hunt, right? Or whatever it's called. I can't remember, shooting or hunting or something. So you got your 3 dice, and then another player goes, okay, I'm down on the street, right? And I'm sort of watching from the street. And so when he's about to come out the door, I kind of, give you the signal. I give you the subtle, steal home.
Yeah. The bun sign.
So I go, cool, awesome. So you spend a stress, you're kind of sweating, on the street. You're nervous about this hit that's about to happen. So, okay, so you get a bonus die. So you're like, okay, cool. I now have 4 dice. And you're like, okay, I want a 5th dice. I could push myself for the cost of 2 strife, or the GM, another player, or even yourself might be like, let me propose a devil's bargain. And it's always up to the player if they accept this or not. So like a devil's bargain might be, okay, I'll give you an additional die, but regardless of what happens, right? Somebody from a rival gang is going to see you, that you're the one who made the shot.
Okay.
And you say, do I want that to happen or not? That happens regardless of whether or not you succeed or you fail. There's consequences. Devil's bargain is a way to be like, no matter what happens, something, negative happens to you, something bad happens to you, but it's worth an extra die. And so devil's bargain is a great way for you to sort of get extra dice, but it keeps the game evolving and keeps getting it feral. So
I feel like that could be harder than the complications.
Potentially. But the nice thing about it is it can sometimes be like, sometimes a player will go, hey, anybody have a suggestion, for devil's bargain? And another player will be like, oh, this is a great way to fuck yourself, like, or whatever. Or like, maybe we're assassins and we're just killing some local, guild leader who didn't pay his dues to the right people. Right. And we were contracted to kill this guy. And, you're going to do the devil's bargain, and someone goes, oh, I've got an idea. How about, you don't know this, but how about that girl that you've started to be seeing, that you're trying to, get romantic with or whatever? How about this is her uncle or her dad?
She's related.
And she's related. And your character might not even know that right now. But if you accept, that's true. Right?
Okay.
And now you kill it, and then it's like, oh, my father died today. He was shot down in the street. You're like, oh shit, and if she ever finds out, it's going to be huge for your character. It's going to cause a lot of problems.
Interesting.
So it's a way to sort of let the players get additional dice, and they can pay with this sort of resource mechanic, or they can kind of contribute, and make the world. Because again, the idea is that you kind of want things to kind of always be spiraling towards from bad to worse.
Yeah. Interesting.
And again, a lot of players do have a hard time with that, where they kind of like, no, I want to win. And it's like, well,
I could just see that being hard because it's like, I don't know. It's like proposing something that, like, how much do I want to F myself? And so there's this, I'm sure players try to cheese it, and GMs hopefully keep them in line a bit.
Yes, you do need, and again, ultimately the GM can allow or disallow any devil's bargain. But also that's a great way. This game is really good at letting you set the tone of your game using all the same mechanics. So what do I mean by that? Well, maybe in your game, Bob, a devil's bargain is, somebody notices you and, your reputation's a little bit damaged. Maybe in my game, a devil's bargain is like, you have to sacrifice your soul to a demon.
Oh, geez.
You know what I mean? Mechanically, it's the same thing. It's worth an extra die. But in your game, devil's bargains they're not that, the devil's pretty nice. He's very reasonable. Whereas in my game, the devil might be horrendous, right? And I could set the tone of what it feels like to play in our game just by how we give out devil's bargain. There's no right way or wrong way to do it.
So what is the devil's bargain in Blades fictionally?
Yeah.
Like, is it like you literally making a contract with the devil?
No. It's just a term, right? The idea is that your character does not know that this is happening. The devil's bargain is happening outside of the fiction, right?
Okay.
It is a meta mechanic, right?
Okay.
You as a player are making a player-based decision, and you're like, I want to see this story get even more fucked up and more crazy. I want my dice now, and sure, this may cause us unbelievable trouble later on. But I'm excited not only to get my extra die, but I'm also excited to see where that really crazy problem is going to cause. You know, the PC, the character, would never want, you know, these bad things to happen willingly. So it happens outside of the fiction, right?
Yeah, and I guess if they couldn't figure something out, you just like, well, I guess I default to the push.
Yeah, and if
I have the stress to be able to do it or something.
Yeah, and if there's no devil's bargain to be had, there's no devil's bargain to be had. Sometimes there's nothing to be had, right? And
okay,
so that's fine.
Cool.
So so you set this position, and again, the position is really tied into the fiction, right? Like, what does this look like? Are you, you know, in D&D terms, right? You know, you're in a ferocious melee. Are you, you know, side by side with your brothers in arms, shields raised in a shield wall as you know, are holding a narrow doorway against the horde of creatures? Yeah, maybe that's controlled, you know, maybe that's risky. Or are you desperately surrounded, right? You're quadra-flanked by the orcs who are streaming around you, and, you know, your shield has been torn asunder and they're on all sides of you. Okay, well, now you're desperate, right? And that's another way where the GM can really set the tone of their game, right? In your game, maybe being outnumbered 5-1, surrounded, you're like, this is nothing. This is every day in the park for you, right? This is just risky, you know. It's not desperate. It's risky. In my game, I might be like, oh, it's 2 against 1, desperate odds, right? Yeah. And I might be like, oh yeah, just as soon as you're outnumbered, desperate. I can set my tone in my game to be the way I want it to be, and you can set your tone. And that's one of the reasons why when people talk about their Blades of the Dark games, you need to keep that in mind, that the way they set the tone is very different.
That is interesting.
All right. So that is position. All right.
Okay.
The other thing that we have to consider is on the right side of the sheet is effect. Okay. And this is what we call position and effect, P&E. So if position is, how risky is this action? Like, if the things go bad, how much hot water are we going to end up in? Effect is, okay, but when I do set out and do what I set out to do, how effective is it? Okay. The best example I could say, of this is, you probably wouldn't roll for this, but let's just say you were. Somebody says, I want to chop through this oak door to get out. And I go, okay, what are you using? And they go, I've got a dagger.
Okay.
You might say, yeah, that'll work, but your effect is limited. Or someone could say, well, I've got this fireman's axe. And you might say, oh, okay, your effect is great.
Okay. Is these effect? I'm just looking at the word ticks here. Is this like a clock that we're talking about? Because I know clocks are in Blades in the Dark.
They are. So the way to think of ticks is, there's 2 ways to think of effect. One is, not everything goes to a clock. In fact, most skill rolls should be 1 and done.
Oh, okay.
Right. So you need to decide in the fiction, what does that look like? Right. Like, what does limited success or limited effect versus standard effect versus great effect look like? And again, just like with risky, the default is risky standard. Right.
Oh, okay.
Get the normal. However, the ticks are a great way of sort of contextualizing. Imagine there was a clock. You know, how many ticks would you talk if you got a great effect or limited effect? Right.
And you say all this before you roll?
Yeah. So you and the players decide, what is your position? What is your effect?
Okay.
And again, the default is risky standard. So a good example of this, again, going back to the game world, might be like, imagine that, you're being attacked by, again, I'll use D&D as an example, fantasy, right? There's a bunch of cavalry charging your position, but you go, it's pretty desperate, right? Because if things go bad for us, we're on foot, right? We're on foot. So again, desperate, the position is, if things go badly for you, how badly do they go? And it's like, well, if things go badly for us, we're going to get mowed down, right? There's a bunch of armed knights charging us. But we have 15-foot long spears that we have hidden them in the grass at our feet. And we're going to pop them up at the last minute. And they're like anti-cavalry spears. And so the GM might say, yeah, you're right. That is the perfect tool, right? For this is a perfect tool for the job. So you have great effect. Your position is desperate. So if you fail, you're going to fail big. But if you succeed, you're going to succeed big.
Okay.
Right.
So if they were like, all I have is something to lesser effect, you're like, okay, if you succeed, I mean, you'll succeed, well, I guess that's where I'm kind of getting confused.
Yep.
So the succeeding part, when I say I'm trying to make desperate, I'm trying to stop this cavalry from coming.
Correct.
I don't understand how the effect can be limited if you say I do it.
Okay, so
like, if I did it, I stopped them.
Yeah.
So isn't that an effect correct?
Yeah. So again, you achieve a partial or a weak effect. So what does that look like? Well, great effect might look like the cavalry are killed to a man, and they are, routed, and most of them are dead.
Mm-hmm.
Standard effect might be like the cavalry at the last minute, right? Like pull aside their horses and the charge is stopped, but now you have armed cavalrymen running around your position.
Interesting.
Limited might be like, all right, you managed to leap out of the way of one of the horses and, stab one of the knights in the, in the side with your dagger, but the rest of the knights are unharmed, right? Like you didn't like kill all of them.
Interesting. So it's not just so in PBTA. I mean, you do it, but this is you did it, and then what was
correct?
How much did you do?
How much did you do it? So in the game, and
do
also
remember,
like
don't even roll then because they're like, oh, that's not going to be good enough.
Correct. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Right. Like if the GM, like if you give a horse shit idea, and the GM says, "Well, that sounds desperate and limited." I mean, you're risking a lot to gain very little in that situation. So you might go, maybe I need to rethink my approach, right? Maybe I need to rethink my,
or make a better argument to the GM.
Make a better argument to the GM, or address the fiction differently. And traditionally in Blades in the Dark, there are 3 tools that we use to sort of judge effect. Okay. The first is scale, right? Scale is an idea of like, do you have more of them, or are they bigger? And is that helping you or hurting you? For example, if I go, I'm going to sneak me and my crew of 2 thieves, right, into the bank, right, without anybody noticing. And I might say, yeah, that's standard effect. There's just, 2 of you. If you go, I'm going to sneak me and my 35 boys into the bank. Now you have this scale issue. There's a lot of you. That might hurt you. Right? Now your effect is limited. Like the best you could achieve in that situation is you guys get into the bank and they set off the alarm, but they don't set off the alarm until you're like through the doors, Yeah.
So you actually have to work with, because they might say, well, what I'm saying is I did it. We snuck in. But you're like, no, if it's limited, then it's not you sneak in. That's not what success is. You have to kind of rework.
That's correct.
What 6 is.
Right.
Okay.
And a lot of people struggle with this because they say, no, it said I did it. That means I have complete and total success.
This is kind of hard for me to grasp right now.
And the most classic example of this is you state what you're going to do. And you say, I'm going to kill him, with my gun. And I go, okay, make a check. And you succeed, but it's limited effect. And you're like, okay, so you shoot him, and he gets hit in the shoulder. He gets spun around, lands on the cobblestone streets, and he's grasping at his shoulder, fumbling, trying to get behind cover. And you're like, no, but I did it. So he's dead. And it's like, no, you did it. You shot him, but because it's limited effect, you only achieved part of what you achieved, right?
Yeah.
And that could be very difficult for some people because they think this is, by the way, what caused the infamous landing gear debacle.
Oh gosh.
Okay. Because Tim's stated action was, I land the craft safely, or I'm going to land the craft through this hyper blizzard. And he succeeded, but the consequence was that his effect was limited. And so I said, you landed safely. Nobody's hurt, but the landing gear gets damaged because you have to set down so quickly.
Yeah.
And they're like, but that wasn't what I wanted. And you said I did it, and so you could see where this can create this kind of weird tension.
I mean, the 4-5 specifically says you have reduced effect, which makes me think like at one point it was going to be standard.
Correct.
At a 6, but you got a 4-5. Now it's limited.
Correct. And by the way, I should note with that, like if you look at risky 4-5, this isn't that all of these things happen. This is the choice the GM has. You could make them suffer harm, or you could make them suffer a complication.
Okay.
Or you could or if you're feeling particularly, if you think there's multiple threats, you could have them, suffer reduced effect and harm. You could have multiple consequences happen. All right. So yes, you can see that you have reduced effect is one of the things that can happen. And so a lot of people really struggle with that because they're like, it says I do it, and now you're telling me, but I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, because you succeeded, but we took that 100% and we took it down to 70%, or we took it down to 50%.
I also feel like it's kind of like a genie making a wish. Like I told you I gave you the wish.
Yes.
But it was worded just a little bit differently.
Correct.
You said safely, but you didn't say what safely meant.
Correct. And another way to think of it, another way to contextualize it is imagine that if you succeed, the GM doesn't even bother with clocks, right? You just, you basically, if there was a clock, it got created and filled at the same exact time. You don't even worry about it. But if you get limited effect, the GM it's another way of thinking. The GM says, okay, this was originally not going to be a clock. We were just going to say, yeah, you did it. But now you've shot him. He's on the street. He's hurt. We're going to start a clock, which is he's dead. And I'm going to tick it, right? Like once or twice. And now you maybe have to finish him off. Maybe it's another roll. Maybe there's another check because you didn't complete the job, and so this is where people can kind of this can cause problems, and it's very infamous.
Well, it's good to know. And obviously if people are listening, I'm hoping that they are understanding this as well, because it is quite different than a lot of games.
Right.
So that is something to really consider.
So when you're thinking about effect, we think about scale. All right. Like, is something bigger than something, right? Hey, this elephant is going to trample you. Effect, great. Hey, this small chihuahua is going to try to attack you. All right, limited. It's not very effective. So scale is size or quantity of things. The second is quality. All right. How skilled are you? Right. If the greatest swords, if you're just a nobody, all right, some punk from the streets, and you go try to challenge the greatest swordsman in the city to a duel, what do you think your effect is? Right? Limited.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not on this list, but one of the effects that you can start off with is none. Like,
a zero.
It's like you start at 0 ticks, right? This is the game's way of saying, look, you're not cut out for this, right? Your quality is too low. Quality can also reflect your equipment. If you think in D&D terms, if you have a magical item, right? If you have a holy mace, right, that is ghost touch, then against undead, right, that is very potent. That's very strong. And that's the third thing that we have to consider. Potency. Is the tool that you're using, or is what you're doing, very effective for what you're describing that you want to do? If I'm trying to burn down a bar, and so we can collect the insurance money, and you're like, okay, well, what are you using? You're like, well, I have these incendiary fire bombs. I'm like, that's the perfect tool for the job.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So you have great effect. If you succeed, the bar burns down perfectly. There's no evidence, right? Because great effect is standard plus, right?
Yep.
It burns down so quickly that nobody has time to get out. It burns down so quickly that nobody sees you do it, and it burns down so quickly that there's no evidence, right? That's what great is, because you're using the perfect tool for the job. If on the other hand, I go, well, how do you set the bar on fire? You're like, well, I'm going to stand in the corner and with a flint and tinder until I get a flame going, and then I'm going to fan it till it catches the kitchen on fire. I'm like, okay, that's totally fine, but that's kind of weak sauce, right? Like, the fire probably will eventually burn down the bar, but people are going to have time to get out. People might have a chance to see you. Maybe other people show up to try to put the fire out because it's not like so immediate. So this is where the fiction kind of comes into it. And a lot of the game is you and the GM describing how and what you're doing and how you're doing it and what you're doing it with to sort of manipulate the position and the effect.
Okay.
Right? Because best case scenario, your character would be in controlled position with great effect, right?
Oh, yeah.
You have all
the best.
It's the best position. But good luck getting that, right? Like, not a lot of times you're going to be ice skating uphill. And also too, the game does say, hey, look, if you do that desperate action, you get an XP bonus. Right?
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the things that you can do in Blades in the Dark is you can trade your position for effect, and you can trade your effect for position.
What do you mean?
So you can make your position worse. So you can take a risky position and move it down to desperate. And in exchange, your effect goes up.
is it 1-for-1 technically? So if I go from controlled to desperate, I can go from limited to great.
Yep.
Hypothetically, if
Yep.
it makes sense in the fiction.
Granted, you do have to make it make sense in the fiction.
Yeah.
So let's go back to our sniper example. I say you're in the tower. You have controlled position. Okay, and you're shooting this guy. It's a long shot. You know, you're unlikely to, just kill him right out, right? I mean, getting a headshot here is pretty crazy. So I'm going to say you have standard effect.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, okay, so what would happen if I got standard effect? What does that look like in the fiction GM? And I go, he'd be shot, and he'd be shot in a vital area, but he wouldn't be immediately dead. And you're like, so what would a headshot look like? And I was like, if you got great effect, that would be a headshot. One shot, one kill. And you're like, okay, I'm in controlled standard. I'm going to trade my controlled down to risky so that I can increase my effect from standard to great. And I go, great. What does that look like? You're like, well, you said I was in this really hidden position, right?
Yeah.
What if I go out onto the roof and I get into an even better position where I have an even better shot, where I can really take my time, but I'm more exposed. I'm no longer in my super concealed bell tower. I'm actually out on the roof, like on the gutter, hanging over the edge. And so if this goes bad, everyone's going to see me, on the street. The consequence could go up. And I go, yeah, that sounds awesome. Cool. You're going to trade controlled for risky.
Okay.
And you're going to increase your state. Now, granted, you have to make it make sense in the fiction, right? But that, that's one of the situations too, where it's like, imagine, you're fighting a dragon, and I'm like, yeah, dude, like, it's this, you're barely going to do anything to this guy. Your effect is limited. And you're like, what if I leap onto his back and I start stabbing him in the back? Oh, okay. You're taking your position down to desperate, but you can raise your effect, right? Because you've put yourself in that situation. And again, it all has to make sense.
Well, you see, he has a scale missing.
Right.
And if I get it right in that opening.
Right. And I go,
ultimate damage.
And I go, okay, but you're going to have to be on his back. And if you do that, you're going to be like in the worst possible position. If you roll badly, he's going to fuck you up. And you go, okay, yeah, that sounds good.
Look, Smog has to die.
Right. Smog clearly has to go. So again, that it's this back and forth. So that's position and effect. That's like the heart of the game, is the players going back and forth with that.
It's funny because if you would tell me what the Heart of Blades is, I would have said it must be clocks. Like, right. I had no idea. I wouldn't know.
Right. So we talked about consequences, and you can see that as you get problems, if you roll.
Yeah, I like that there's a little cheat sheet for that.
You got the cheat. Nice. So there's 5 categories of consequences. Reduced effect. Basically, you did it, but you didn't do it as well as you wanted to. A complication, which is, a new problem, a wandering monster appears, right? Somebody saw you from the street, all sorts of problems. Lost opportunity basically means, you're about to take the shot, and then at the last minute, a bus full of school children goes by, and you're like, shit, I lost this opportunity to take the shot. Now it's like it might cut to your character running out onto the roof, leaping onto another roof so that he can keep up with the guy before he gets away, right? Like, a lost opportunity is basically like, in the fiction, you lose your opportunity to take the action that you were about to take.
Interesting. Okay.
Now, a worse position means losing control of the situation. This action carries you into a more death. This is out of the firing pan into the fire. One of the things that you could think of is, hey, before you were in kind of a risky situation, all right? But so for example, let's say we're in a bar, and you're trying to intimidate the bar owner into paying his protection money. And I go, this guy's a pretty dangerous guy. He's been around. It's a risky position. And you say, okay, I'm going to intimidate him. I'm going to use my command skill. I'm going to get in his face. I'm going to tell him, if he doesn't pay, we're going to not only hurt him, we're going to hurt his family. I'm like, oh shit, okay. And you roll a 4 or 5. So you do it. The bartender is intimidated by you. But as a part of the complication, or as part of the consequence, I say, but I'm going to say that you get into a worse position. He becomes intimidated. And just then, 5 of his cronies come walking into the bar. And now you're in a desperate situation. I don't know what you're going to do next. I don't know what you're going to try to do, but you've just made the situation go from bad to worse.
Yeah. Interesting.
And it's like, we're turning up the heat. It's worse position is sort of a way of like delaying the damage, but making it so that if it does occur, it's going to be worse. Right.
Yeah, that's gotta be a pretty decent GM skill that you learn.
It's one of my favorites. because basically what you're doing is ratcheting up the tension.
Yeah.
Right? Nothing bad has happened yet, but now the situation just got worse.
Yeah,
you know,
and things escalated quickly.
Things escalated quickly, as they tend to do. And then the last and easiest is harm, right? Which is basically your character takes some form of damage.
Okay.
Right. And obviously has to make sense in the fiction, but and to be clear too, harm in this game can be pretty abstract. Harm could be things like distracted. Harm could be, panic attack. Harm could be worried sick.
Interesting.
Harm could basically be anything that is like a negative debility that affects your character. Right? It doesn't just necessarily mean physical harm.
But it looks like if you ratchet it up to 4, it's fatal.
Yes. Level 4 harm is typically fatal. All right.
And how do you eliminate harm? Is there like a...
Yeah. So we've been talking so far about the roll, the heist, the action rolls. That usually happens during the phase that's called the score phase. And
I actually know this stuff.
Okay. Yeah. So on the score phase, your character is going and doing crime time, right? It's the big heist. Between heists, between scores, your character has downtime. Yep. And one of the things that you can do in your downtime is try to heal your harm. So that's how that comes up.
And so you just make it make sense in the fiction.
Yep. Well, I mean, sometimes it's just, time passes or sometimes maybe, you rub some Robitussin on it, or maybe you go see a black market surgeon who, stitches up your leg without alerting the authorities. It's pretty much, kind of.
But there's no roll. It just happens.
Sadly, in the core game, there is a roll. However, in my game, I got rid of the roll. And John Harper, in his most recent expansion, which came out Saturday, he also got rid of the roll. So,
okay.
That's when I don't like to roll for that. I like to just say, look, if you're willing to spend your action, you can do it. All right.
Okay.
So next, this is the other super important thing to talk about. Okay. Is at the bottom of page 1, there's something called the resistance roll.
Mm-hmm.
All right, this is what's so interesting about this game. This game wants your characters to be badasses, but not superheroes. See, superheroes, D&D characters, they win and they don't pay any price.
Okay.
Right? They win and they're at full hit points and there's nothing wrong with them. Right? In Blades in the Dark, your characters will frequently win, but without paying a terrible price. In Blades in the Dark, whenever the GM assigns a consequence as a result of a roll, you the player can say, that doesn't happen. I'm going to resist that.
Okay.
And then you roll some dice and you take potentially a little bit of stress or a lot of stress. Okay, it's a random roll. So what you do is you roll your dice pool and you take the highest die result that you got.
So wait, let's go back. So
yeah,
I rolled a 4 or 5.
Yep. Yeah, you roll a 4 or 5.
Or
here, Bob. Yeah. So let's do this, Bob. Let's say we're in a risky position. We roll we roll a 4 or 5. So pick a consequence.
Well, I guess consequence. Let's do with reduced effect.
Okay, reduced effect.
The first one,
right? So
didn't happen as well.
The consequence is reduced effect. It didn't happen as well. So that is a consequence. You can say, "Nah, I actually didn't have that consequence. I did it."
Okay.
And you have to describe it in the fiction, but then you're going to roll some dice, and you're going to take 6.
But the dice are the same attribute I just used.
So no. So it's called. We'll get to this when we get to the character sheet. But your character has 3 attributes that are used for resisting.
Oh, okay.
And you're going to roll that, and you're going to take 6 minus what you roll.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you roll a 6,
you're good.
You took nothing. If you roll a 1, you're going to take 5 stress. And when that happens,
woof.
When that happens, you avoid or reduce that consequence. Now, again, this is where the tone of the game comes in. Right. So
no matter what,
you succeed.
Okay.
You're not rolling to see if you can resist.
Oh, okay.
You can resist and it will be guaranteed. The only question is how much stress are you paying for it?
Okay.
So as an example, you're in a desperate position, okay? Because a blue coats, that's the police. Or, let's make it even more, you're desperate. A pissed off vampire, okay, is chasing you across the rooftops of Duskwall, okay? And you're running from left to right, and then you're like, you get to a dead end, and you're like, is it a dead end? I go, oh yeah, it's like 15 feet to the next rooftop. You have to turn and fight. And you go, no, I'm gonna leap. And I go, that's a desperate position. And you go, I know. So you roll the desperate roll and you fail. And I go, and you're like, so what? And by the way, this is how it would happen in the game. I would speak this consequence into the fact. I was like, if you fail, you're falling to the ground and splattering. And you're like, okay, you roll a 2. And I go, you leap out. You don't even get close to the other rooftop. And I go, you fall 3 stories and splatter on the cobblestone, below. Take level 4 harm, squished. And you go, you could say, okay, my character's dead. I'm like, you could do that. Or you could say, I'm going to resist that. And I say, okay, how are you going to resist that? And you say, I'm going to use my attribute prowess, right? At the last minute, as I'm flying through the air, I realize I'm not going to make it. So there's like a power line or like a clothesline, and I grab it with my hands, right? And it kind of like makes me do like a backflip or a spin flip. And then that kind of breaks my momentum. And then I fall and I land like through, like one of those like awnings, that rips. And then I kind of just fall on my butt on the street. Now, as a GM, the tone of your game, I might say, okay, I'm going to reduce the consequence. Instead of level 4 harm splattered, you have level 2 harm, your legs busted up. Or if I'm running a much more like pulpy action hero type game, I might be like, you land, perfect dismount,
superhero landing.
Yeah, superhero landing. People, that's when everybody clapped, and and you take no consequence whatsoever. So I could set the tone of my game by saying, like, when you resist, is it a reduction or is it complete elimination? But what this means is, as a player, you decide if those consequences come into effect. And by the way, those consequences can even be stuff that is happening outside of your character's fiction, right? So for example, I might say, okay, you're breaking in and you get a consequence. And I say, as a consequence, you're going to generate extra heat. Heat is like stars in Grand Theft Auto.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like how much attention does this crime get you? And I say, and you're like, what's happening? I go, well, after the crime is done, hours later, when the police show up, they're going to see that you left behind some evidence, and so there's going to be more heat because they're going to have a little bit of a clue pointing them back to you. And that's a consequence. That's a complication. I'm going to give you more heat. You could, during the middle of the score, say, no, I'm going to resist that. And I'm like, really? How? And I'm like, I'm going to use my insight attribute and say, as we're sort of breaking out, I realized at the last minute, we kind of left this crime scene a mess. And I'm going to like quickly, wipe things for fingerprints, and I'm going to quickly get rid of any incriminating evidence. And I go, cool, take some stress, and you don't generate that consequence.
Okay.
So as a player, you have a ton of control, but realize you're burning up stress, and stress is going to give you trauma, and stress is going to cause you problems, and stress is going to cause you issues. And that means that you sort of are this self-perpetuating whirlwind of hot mess, right? You're very proficient, but you cause a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But it's very empowering as a player to have the GM say, this terrible thing happens to you because you rolled low. And you get a choice. You can say, no, I'm going to resist.
It is interesting, but that does.
But it's not free.
Because I was talking earlier about pushing, but now it makes sense that, like, stress could rack up pretty quick.
Absolutely.
If you're not careful.
If you are not careful, it will reap.
Yeah. That I didn't know, because that obviously I would be pushing every roll. Just 2 stress. Like, I'll deal with that when I got time.
Exactly. So, that is sort of like the core way that the actions work. Now, sort of get a sense for how this all fits together. If you go over to the link I sent you, there's a link for a blank playbook.
Where's the blank? Oh, blank sheet. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this will bring up a blank playbook.
Okay.
And actually, while you're there, you can see that, like D&D, while you're on that website, there are different playbooks.
Yep.
There's a cutter, a hound, a leech, a lurk, a slide, a spider, a whisper, etc.
These kind of like the brute.
These are basically like the classes of the game.
Yeah.
So the cutter is like a brutal fighter.
I think I was the cutter when I played that one time.
A mean, vicious son of a bitch from the streets. The hound is more of a a tracker and a hunter. Of beasts and men. The leech is a mad scientist, alchemist, right? Crazy person.
Okay.
The lurk is a thief, like a shadow thief. The slide is like a social thief, right? They're very good at like
kind of like these names.
Con man, manipulator. And then the spider is like a master manipulator behind the scenes. And then the last one, Whisper, is someone who can talk to ghosts and can get them to do stuff for him. So pretty cool stuff. So just for the ease of use, which of these sounds interesting to you?
Well, I did the cutter before, so I don't want to do that. But the hound, I usually play either barbarians or rangers, so I feel like hound would be
very
more
true.
up my alley.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's
the hound.
Yeah, so why don't you open up the hound?
Yep.
And I'll go ahead and drop it into chat so chat can see the hound. If I can succeed. Maybe. There we go. All right. So this is the Blades in the Dark hound sheet. Okay. And we can see over here on the right-hand side, it's a deadly sharpshooter and tracker. That's what a hound does, right? Now, like anything in a game, one of the things that you need to know is, how does the game work? Well, the game works by making these action rolls, and you can see those actions now over on the right-hand side of your screen, Bob. Okay? There are hunt, study, survey, tinker, finesse, prowl, skirmish, wreck, attune, command, consort, and sway. So those are like 12 actions of the game, the sort of the skills of the game, if you will. And you can see that as a hound, you start with 2 dots in hunt already and 1 dot in survey. And as you would make a character, you get some additional dots to put into some of the other skills. All right. And this determines how many dice you roll when you go to take one of those actions. Additionally, you can see that on the first column of each of the sections is kind of to the left of this like line.
Yeah.
So you can see that there's something that says insight, prowess, and resolve.
Yeah.
This is what you roll for that resistance roll.
That's what I figured.
And to figure out your character's insight, you add up how many dots you have that are in that first column.
Oh, okay.
So
you can have a max of 4.
You can have a max of 4. So if your character had 1 dot in finesse, 1 dot in prowl, 1 dot in skirmish, and 1 dot in wreck, they would have a 4 prowess.
It's interesting because you're good at resisting, but however, you don't succeed well in
correct
any one thing.
So the game
that's actually kind of nice.
It is kind of cool because the game basically kind of rewards you for going deep on a skill, right? You get to roll more dice with that. But the game also rewards you if you go broad on your skills.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. I kind of like that.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting way of doing that. So you'll also see that each of the 3 sections has its own XP track. As when you make a desperate hunt roll or a desperate study roll or a desperate survey roll, and it says mark XP, that's where you're marking that XP.
And when it's
full, you get a dot.
Oh, okay. No matter what. Because I know like in L5R and Forbidden Lands, the dots cost more as they go up.
Nope. Okay. It's the same. The only difference is you can't get the 4th dot until you take a certain upgrade, like for your whole crew. You need to have like the right training facility. You have to like unlock the 4th dot. But
so at default, 3 at the beginning of the game, and then later on you might do something that says, okay, now you're able to get the 4th in finesse, prowl, or something.
Correct. Exactly. So, and those are basically the kind of, that's it, the core game. The hunt is sort of, it could be shooting a gun. It could be, tracking someone from the wilderness, right? It's anything and there's a lot of overlap between, the actions that you might take. Like, for example, if let's say that, you're in this kind of weird fantasy city and you're like, somebody gets away, they're bleeding, and you're going to try to follow, and it's raining. It's a pouring rain, but somebody got stabbed, they're bleeding, and they run off into the streets, and you're going to go track them down to see where they went. You might say, is that a hunt roll? Yeah, it might be, but it could also be a survey roll, right? Like maybe you're looking around, you're very observant, Could it even be a study roll where you look at a few blood drops and take what you know of the person and the direction that they're going, and you sort of logically figure out, oh, I know where they're headed. They're heading to here. And, so you're not actually following them. You've just sort of figured out where they're going.
What is prowl?
Prowl is kind of your generic movement. If you're running, if you're leaping, climbing, moving around, being kind of, acrobatic and that kind of way, athletic.
Okay.
So the game itself is quite basic in that regard. You just have these dots. And obviously as a group, when you're building a crew with your fellow PCs, you would want to, make sure that you, have some sort of balance of skills and abilities.
Yeah, you don't want like 4 hounds.
Yeah. In fact, it might say defaultly that you don't even get to, if someone picks a playbook, you can't even pick it. You know what I mean?
Oh, that would make sense.
Like you're just like, you don't get that. Okay. So next on your character sheet.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pulling this over here. So those are your core abilities. All right. Then in the middle of the character sheet, you can see your special abilities, your playbook abilities. These are these are your feats. These are your powers. This is what you can gain. And you can see there is an XP track there as well.
Mm-hmm.
When that XP track fills up, you guessed it, to pick a new ability.
Okay, so I don't have any of them checked right now, so I have no abilities?
At the beginning of the game, as a hound, you would get you get 1.
Okay.
So, so you get to...
Now let's just look at this. I'm looking at... So first one says sharpshooter.
Yep.
So let's say I'm making I'm trying to snipe someone in our sniping scenario.
Yeah.
So I'm using the sharpshooter special ability.
Yep.
But that's not the dice roll I make. I'm making a finesse roll.
So it says you could push yourself to do... So remember what push yourself is. 2 stress.
Yes.
2 stress.
And a D6.
Right. But in this case,
yes,
you are pushing yourself not for a D6. You are pushing yourself to be able to make a range attack at an extreme distance. Right. So this is like you're like a mile away or something crazy, like this is something that only you could do. It's kind of not a supernatural ability, right? But it's like starting to...
It's like anime.
It's a little bit more anime. Yes. And only a character who has sharpshooter could do this, but it does cost 2 stress. You have to push yourself in order to make that kind of shot.
Which is fine, but what dice am I using for that?
Well, that depends. I mean, in all likelihood, you'd be making a hunt roll.
Oh, it's a hunt roll. Okay.
Yeah.
So now I'm desperate. Where does the XP go?
Okay. Well, for example, maybe you're not desperate because you're making a sharpshooter shot.
Okay.
You're so far away, there's no way it could go, badly. But let's say it was a desperate shot. You get to mark XP. That XP would go into the insight track because you're making a hunt roll.
Yeah. But why doesn't it go to the sharpshooter track?
Because the sharpshooter is a special ability. It is not
But it has an XP track.
It does.
So how do I get XP on that?
Great question. So at the end.
Oh, okay.
So
that's what I was getting at.
No, that's totally fine. So one of the things we always talk about with games is, okay, you're playing the game. You know how to play it, right? What does the game want you to do? How does the game reward you? All right. So let's scroll down to the middle left of your character sheet.
Okay.
There's a section
Earning
called
XP.
Earning XP.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So every time you roll a desperate action, mark XP in that action's attribute. So anytime you make a desperate hunt roll, you mark an experience point in insight. All right. Then the rest, it works like Forbidden Lands. At the end of the session, for each item below, mark 1 XP in your playbook or an attribute. So when you get this experience points, you could either put it to one of your attribute tracks or you could put it to that playbook XP track that you were just talking about. Or
so at the end of each session,
Yep.
for each item below.
Yep.
Oh, these are these 3 items.
3 questions.
Mark 1 XP in your playbook or an attribute. And that could be any attribute.
Yes.
Or 2 XP if that item occurred multiple times.
Right. So if you did it a bunch that session, you can mark 2 XP.
Oh, but never more than 2.
Never more than 2.
Okay.
But there's 3 questions. So you could theoretically earn 6 XP.
Yep. Okay.
So the first is specific to you as a hound. You addressed a challenge with tracking or violence. That is unique to your playbook. This game says you're a hound. You want to address challenges with tracking and violence. If you don't want to do that, don't be a hound.
Okay.
The second question is the same for everybody. You expressed your beliefs, your drives, your heritage, or your background. Basically, did we learn something about your character? Did you show us something about your character, where they came from, and where they're from, and what do they really care about? What do they drive? This is more of a role-playing thing,
Okay.
Absolutely. And then the third question is, you struggled with issues from your vice or traumas during the session. So if you have those traumas, if you have these issues with your vice and it causes problems for you, guess what? You get to earn experience points. So the game is saying, like, if you really want to beat the game and car op it, you need to be tracking and doing violence because you're a hound. You need to be expressing your character's drives and beliefs and background. And you want to be struggling with issues from your drama and vice. And if you want to put some cherries on the top, maybe do a couple desperate rolls at the same time.
Yeah.
So you could imagine that you have a character who's a hound and they play the entire session and they never do anything desperate and they don't address anything with tracking or violence. They don't role play at all. They don't tell us anything about their character, and they deliberately try to avoid any issues from trauma or vice. They would earn 0 XP.
Yep.
Meanwhile, Smith earns 9 XP because he finds every possible way to make his character's life a living hell. But that's because Smith is playing to the game.
Yes.
And as a result of that, Smith's character, sure, he might be fucked up beyond all
You're
belief,
rewarded for it,
but you're rewarded for it. And so this is the play pattern of the game, like, in a nutshell. So this is how you earn XP. Now let's go ahead and make a character, Bob.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. So the first thing is we need to choose a playbook. And in your case, we're going to choose the Hound.
That's right.
Now, the second thing is we need to choose a heritage. Okay. This is okay. You can see this here. Now, the book does have some details for this. But this is basically, where are you from in the world? Okay. And again, the book has some details for this. The Dagger Isles, for example, is sort of like a weird tropical jungle land. Aruvia is kind of like almost a Middle Eastern kind of, Persian lands. Scovlin is like a Celtic rough land that was formerly enslaved and have sort of rebelled and recently gotten their freedom. And Akaros is sort of the default land. Now, again, for purposes of this game, normally we would get more into this and we would talk about the backgrounds and we would do all this stuff. But do any of those stand out to you?
Dagger Isles.
Okay, great. When Ross made a character, his character was from the Dagger Isles.
I just have been all into this pirate stuff lately. So
you know what's funny? Ross's character's goal was to have his own ship.
It's pretty baller. I like Ross. Ross is good people.
Yeah, so he literally, it's literally what he did. So hold on a sec here. All right.
I mean, I think I just got Rapscallion.
The
PBTA book and from Kickstarter, the PDF. So I'm like, I don't have time to run that game, but I have it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, here, if you want to be a rootless wanderer, you could be from the Dagger Isles. People there often grow up on ships and travel a lot before settling down. They're known as corsairs and merchants who live without the lightning barriers, dealing with the spirits in other ways. And this is a good time to talk a little bit about the meta setting.
Yeah, I was going to say some of that didn't make sense to me.
Yeah. So in this game, the idea is there was an apocalypse. And before, when people died, right, they died, their ghosts left them and they went, I don't know, who knows, beyond the world, to heaven, to hell, to some other mystical place.
To Gaia.
Well, now the gates of hell, the gates of the dead, shattered. They broke in an apocalypse. They were trying to do some magical shenanigans and things went horribly awry. So now when people die, their ghosts don't go somewhere else. Their ghosts basically stick around and become
everyone.
and they become
sounds crowded.
and they become vengeful hate monsters.
Jeez.
And they, supernaturally tear people apart. So the world essentially is a wasteland. But there's a couple of cities, and this game takes place in a city called Duskwall that is literally surrounded by a electric field fence, like crackling lightning. It's called the lightning barrier because it's almost like Ghostbuster energy. And
Why does this sound like that Final Fantasy movie?
Spirits Within? It's kind it's kind of similar. It's kind of
okay.
similar.
I was like, I'm getting the vibe.
It's kind of similar. And the ghosts, basically their spirits burn up in this electroplasm, right? Like they can't cross it. So you can imagine this city. Have you ever seen the Judge Dredd?
Oh yeah.
You know how like everybody's crammed in that one city and then outside of it is just wasteland? Same thing here. Everybody's crammed into this city because if you leave, it's called the Deathlands. It's wasteland, where inside the city, you have the lightning barriers to protect you from, the rampaging ghosts. But within the city, if someone dies, their ghost rips free and threatens to, go amok, run amok. And there's basically like a high-ranking government group that are kind of like government-sanctioned Ghostbusters. They're called the Spirit Wardens, and their job is to basically go wrangle up rogue spirits and then incinerate them, and burn their spirits up.
So is there any reason to leave the city?
There could be, but it would be very dangerous.
Is it like you trying to go from like we want to go from city to city? Like you're trying to get to a new.
It's almost impossible. In fact, that's part of the design of the game is they want you to. It's a pressure cooker, right? You can't get out. You're stuck here.
So they grow food and everything in the city. Like it's full on. Okay.
Yeah, they have like mushroom. Oh, by the way, there's like really no sun either. So
right.
So they grow mushrooms and eels, and like it's a pretty brutal living.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all grown within the city.
But I'm on an island somewhere. Like it doesn't happen.
Right. So the Dagger Island people. They live on boats. It's like they just move around, like so the ghosts can't catch them or something like that. And no one's really even sure how they do it,
Cool.
All right. So the next thing that we need to decide is your character's background. Now, this is going to be one of, and by the way, when it says, so Dagger Isles, for example, let's say you grew up on a ship. Right?
Yeah.
So like what was the name of the ship?
Ooh.
So you
the name of the ship.
Yeah.
I want to do something lady.
All right.
Something lady. It's like an adjective, maybe.
Right. The painted lady.
Oh yeah, I like that.
All right, so there we go.
I'm just imagining some kind of maiden on the front of our ship.
Yeah, exactly. So you're from the Dagger Isles, but you grew up on the Painted Lady. The next is you pick your background. All right, and your background can be whatever you want it to be, but then generally you're going to categorize it as one of 7 categories. Is it academic? Is it labor? Is it law? Is it trade? Is it military? Is it noble? Is it underworld? Were you a pirate? Were you a merchant? What were you doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. Does the Dagger House have a military force?
Probably not.
Okay.
But they could.
I'm gonna lean more.
We could make
underworld.
it up. We could make it up.
No.
All right. So underworld. So you were a pirate.
I'm really more underworld.
Were you a pirate?
Yeah. I was thinking more of like a black market dealer.
Okay.
Trades dealer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're a smuggler.
Yeah. Smuggler. That's a good one. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
I can get you the stuff you need.
All right. Great. So you're a smuggler. You come from the underworld. You know the ships. You know how the people. Whatever. So now remember, one of the ways that we earn experience points is by expressing our heritage and expressing our background, right? So throughout the course of a session of play, you would try to figure out a way to bring up, that you grew up on a ship, that you're like, well, this reminds me of this one time when I was
taking my backstory.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And you could generate that on the fly, but you're doing that because it's going to earn you experience points.
Okay.
And everybody knows that. All right. The next thing, we're going to go over to the right side of our sheet. You've got 2 dots in hunt. You start with that default, and you got 1 dot in survey.
Mm-hmm.
You get 4 dots to assign to any of the 12 skills. Nothing can be higher than 2 at this point.
Okay.
So where do you want to put your dots?
4 dots.
Yeah.
I can't go higher than 2. Well, it says I need to do a little bit of violence, so I feel like I want to go with wreck.
Okay. So wreck is more like destroying things, breaking things, going ham in on things.
And it sounds like my personality. Maybe
So here,
skirmish is more about this hound.
when you wreck, you unleash savage force. You might smash down a door or a wall with a sledgehammer, or you could use an explosive to do the same. Right? It's not about like D&D attribute. It's about like, what are you trying to do? Right? So if somebody tried to batter down a door, that's wreck. If somebody tried to use explosives to do the same, that's wreck, right? Because you're blowing your basically.
Yeah, but does that sound like violence? Violence seems more of a skirmish.
So watch.
Thing.
So this is an example of where there's some overlap. You might employ chaos or sabotage to create a distraction to overcome an obstacle. You could try to overwhelm an enemy with sheer force in battle, but maybe skirmishing would be better. Right. So it's like you could use wreck, but maybe skirmish would be better. Right. Like it depends on the situation. When you skirmish, you entangle a foe in close combat so they can't easily escape. You might brawl or wrestle with them. You might hack and slash. You might seize or hold a position. You could try to fight in a formal duel, but but in a duel, maybe finesse would be better.
Yeah, finesse is not really my. You said prowl is like movement.
Prowl is you traverse skillfully and quietly.
I want that.
All right.
I want prowl. I want skirmish.
Okay. Now remember 2, that means that you now have a prowess of 2.
Yep. I don't see my guy. Attune, command, consort, sway.
So attune is special in this game. Command is obviously you're like yelling at people. Consort is like you are, making buddies and, you're making friends. Sway is persuasion, lying. Attune is your character able to attune to the ghosts. So attune is kind of like how you talk to ghosts.
Let's go with consort. If I'm this underground dealer type guy, smuggler, I might know some people.
Yep. Okay.
Bob is making a better barbarian alchemist and blades than he could. Damn it, Boothby.
It's pretty good. So you got one more dot.
Let's just go. I was thinking about going all the way in on survey, but if there's enough overlap between hunt and survey, I don't want to go too much.
It's not like, so for example, we'll read here.
Yeah.
When you survey, you observe the situation. You anticipate outcomes. You might spot signs of trouble before it happens. You might uncover opportunities or weaknesses. You might detect a person's motives or intentions, or you could try to spot a good ambush point, but maybe hunting would be better.
Yeah. See, that's, I don't know what anybody in the chat thinking anything specific? I definitely want prowl, skirmish, consort, but this fourth one, I'm a little open to. My first thought was wreck. I don't think attune makes sense. Command, I don't know if I'm a command type. Finesse, I see my guy more of like I'd go command or sway. I could see sway being like persuasion. I mean, if I'm smuggling and I'm trying to make deals.
Yeah. So sway is you influence with guile, charm, or argument.
Yeah. Yeah. To order people around or manipulate them. I think of manipulates. That's sway.
Yeah, that's sway.
Yeah. I feel like I'm just under, I know people.
Right.
I kind of get them to do what I need to do. That's how I've been able to survive this long.
And I should point
out a
little
bit of a rough and tough.
Yeah. And I should also
get around.
Yeah. And I should also point out this is a very balanced character, because you have 2 in insight, 2 in prowess, 2 in resolve.
Yeah.
So that means that no matter which of these you have to roll, you're going to be rolling 2 dice, which is great. It also means that you kind of have an ability to do a little bit of everything. You can do.
Yeah, I didn't want to be too hamstringed into something.
Right. You can do some social stuff. You can do some physical stuff. Right. So you have some options. Okay.
So that's what we'll go with. Thanks, William.
All right. So next. Now, of course, remember, normally you would be doing this with a whole crew.
Correct. And obviously we all are trying to balance each other out.
Correct. To a certain extent, extent.
Because I imagine when you're forming a crew, you're like, what do we need? We need a cutter. We need someone with some wreck in this crew. We got a big score.
Exactly. All right. So next we have to choose a special ability. So this is our middle section here. There's 6 or 7 abilities that we can pick from.
Okay.
And if you can't decide, choose the first ability. It's there for a reason, right? It's
okay.
It's kind of
that's what they recommend.
That's kind of the default. But we can take a look at these, and you can kind of get a sense for how this game works. Again, So sharpshooter lets you basically use your weapon in a way that kind of defies the odds, right? Focused is your character is, you could think of your character as like, you're the hunter that doesn't give up. You're determined. So you may expend your special armor, which is basically a way of saying you get a kind of get out of jail free card to resist a consequence of surprise or mental harm, or to push yourself for ranged combat or tracking. So basically you get a free use of pushing yourself per session or per each heist. Or if something happens to you, like you get distracted, you lose focus, you could say, no, I don't. I'm going to use my focused special armor and I avoid that consequence entirely, right? Your character's like super dialed in. Ghost Hunter is you have a hunting pet.
That sounds kind of funny, but I don't know if that's not the vibe I'm going for.
All right. Scout lets you gather information more easily, and you get +1 effect when you do this.
That's pretty good.
So that means that if the GM goes, okay, you're just combing the streets, you're keeping an eye out, that's standard effect. And you say, I have Scout. And since I'm trying to locate this target, I'm really good at this. I know all the right places. I know where to look for people.
Good.
That my standard effect is great.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Okay. And then also, by the way, when you hide in a prepared position or use camouflage, you get an additional die for free to rolls to avoid detection. So
yeah, it seems pretty good too.
All right. Survivors. Now, again, from hard-won experience or from an occult ritual, you are immune to the poisonous miasma of the Deathlands, and you are able to subsist on the strange flora and fauna there. So
that's outside the city.
So you're able to survive, but also you get an additional stress box over and above what everybody else gets. Tough as nails. Penalties from harm are one less level severe. So when you're harmed, depending on how powerful the harm is, you suffer penalties. Yours are one level lower than they would be. Although level 4 harm is still fatal. And lastly, Vengeful, you get a new XP trigger. So if you take Vengeful, you get something else that can gain you XP. You got payback against someone who harmed you or someone you care about. If your crew helped you get payback, also mark XP for the crew.
That's pretty fun. I think I like Scout though. Scout seems really solid for this.
Right.
I do like Focused a lot. Ghost Hunter would be fun if that was the vibe I'm going. I think Ghost Hunter is kind of fun. Why are there 2 boxes next to Ghost Hunter?
So if you take so when you choose your ghost, right? So not only is your hunting pet is imbued with spirit energy. All right. So when you take this ability, you get some sort of pet, but it also gains an arcane ability. Ghost Form, Mind Link, or Arrow Swift. You could take this ability again to choose an additional arcane ability for your pet. So when we played Blaze in the Dark with Matt Holloway, he was a hound and he had Ghost Hunter and he had like a pet bird. And it started off with Mind Link. So Matt could basically like see through what it saw. But then
what is that called in Game of Thrones?
Warging.
Yeah.
And then, but then later, as their crew became, in the fiction, in the mechanics, he just took the ability again. But in the fiction, their crew was dealing a lot with ghosts. And eventually he imbued his bird with ghost energy. And now his bird could basically become like a ghost form. It could like phase through walls. It could it could see into buildings. And Matt had this mind link with it. So he could like send out his ghost bird to go do this reconnaissance. So it's pretty cool.
Sweet. All right. Well, I'm taking Scout.
All right. Scout's a good option. And also remember too, we get experience points when we solve problems with violence or tracking. So this is pretty good for that perspective. All right. Next, choose a close friend and a rival. So if we scroll down to the very bottom left of our table or of our page, we can see that there are a list of 5 people already written here and a list for 5. And there's a list for 5 more. We could make up our own if we want, or we could just use one of the ones that we have on the list. And these are the same for everybody. You could change them. It's just a suggestion. But the idea is that one of these people is a close friend. Now, you know all 5 of these people.
Gotcha.
Right? So Steiner, an assassin. Celine, a sentinel.
What's a sentinel?
Like a guard or like a a watch person. You know Melvir, a psyker, right? A doctor. Valeris, a spy, and Costa, a bounty hunter. So all 5 of these people.
I got this.
One of them is a close friend, a longtime ally, a family relation, or a lover?
Celine.
All right. So Celine is your close relative now, or a close relation. Could be a lover. It could be a friend. It could be an ally. Now, part of
I'm
that,
going with ally.
yeah. So part of that, you can just kind of express as you kind of go through the course.
Well, I think it makes total sense if this is some kind of guard,
right?
That sometimes I'm able to get in and out of situations that not everyone can get into.
Okay. So that's pretty sweet. Now pick another one to be an enemy. They are a rival, a scorned lover, or a betrayed partner.
I'm going bounty hunter for sure.
Okay.
Because obviously we're after some of the same things. I've been able to Indiana Jones and accumulate some rare stuff, but Casta sometimes gets his hand on some stuff before me.
Okay, perfect, awesome. So that's your friends, that's your enemy. Now, one of the things that you'll be able to do throughout the game is you can use these contacts, you can use these deadly friends to sometimes help you with situations. But it's also a great opportunity for the GM to be like, this is when Costa shows up, right?
You always do that to me. Yeah. Costa turns out to be my brother somehow.
Oh, absolutely. All right. So now, and as the game goes on, one of the things that you can do is you can accumulate more contacts and more friends, and you'll add them to this list. And technically, you could have more than this. I've never really seen anybody have more than 10, but it is a thing.
And so you just add them as a contact.
Yep.
And then if you feel strongly, you do ally rival.
Yeah. I mean, okay. That might even be something that you do as like a downtime action, right? So like you might. So one of the things that you can do between heists is use these downtime actions. You might say, hey, you know what? I want to go spend some time with Melvir, and I want to really turn him into a close friend. So I'm going to set up a long-term project. We're going to start a clock, right? And that clock is representing me, taking him out for dinner, for drinks, shooting the shit. I'm going to make some sway rolls.
Yeah, schmooze him.
You schmooze him up, and that's where you make those consort rolls to like, schmooze him up. And then when that long-term clock finishes, you can gain him as a friend, as a close friend.
Sweet.
Alternatively, like during a devil's bargain, I might say, okay, what if, you're like, I want a devil's bargain. And I go, okay, what if Celine finds out about this and turns from a friend to an enemy?
Oh, geez, that sounds.
And you might say, I don't want. That's too pricey. For me. I don't want to say it.
Pretty pricey.
But you could say, yeah, sure, why not? And go. All right. Next, scroll back up to the. Top.
I did like Anon's comment.
Yeah.
If I ever run Blades in the Dark again, I'm sending my players to watch this video. I mean, that's exactly why Derek wanted to do this. One, I'm not as efficient in Blades in the Dark as Derek is, and sometimes Derek is just talking to you guys. But there is a sort of level when he's helping someone, especially in my position, get to a knowledge level of the game, especially making a PC. And I'm hoping that then also can help other people be able to play this game. Because apparently it's a really good game. I've only got to play it one time, but I've heard really good things about it.
So the next is your vice. Pick your preferred type of dice, detail it with a short description, and indicate the name and location of your purveyor. So again, we have a couple different categories: faith, gambling, luxury, obligation, pleasure, stupor, weird. And then basically the game says, what is that exactly? Like, what is it? What is your specific vice? And then who is that person and where do they locate, where are they located? This is
an interesting one.
And this is going to base it. Now, some of this is just for the role playing, but this is the idea of like, what kind of shenanigans can your vice get you into,
Yeah. My first thought, I mean, I love when my vice is faith.
Okay.
I have a good time with that in the game, but I don't know how it ties into this guy just yet.
Well, so there's a couple options. Like, one of the options could be that you are maybe the equivalent of, without getting into the game's details, right? You're the equivalent of like a Roman Catholic, right? Like you're very believe in the faith, but you're from the Dagger Isles. So another option might be, what if you're part of some weird cult?
Yeah.
Like some like multi-level marketing scheme, like your character is like got these really weird, strange beliefs, you're from the Dagger Isles, which are supposed to be kind of exotic and weird. What if you remember, what's his name from Major League? Jobu?
Oh yeah.
Like
he sacrificed a chicken.
Right. So like, what if you feel like you have to make sacrifices, to the god of the sea, or something like that, right? Like you can make it kind of weird and kind of creepy,
Interesting. So I could go that route. I also was thinking the only other thing I could think of just off the top of my head was the luxury one.
Okay.
Because if I am this, I was thinking I'm a tracker, I'm a hunter. I'm also obviously a pretty good marksman, but I'm not. I don't just hunt people, but sometimes I hunt objects in my head. That's what helps me in this marketing scheme that I'm doing with smuggling. And sometimes the luxury is like I also indulge a little bit in the stuff that I'm going after.
Yeah. So we could we could do that luxury. So
that was what struck me. Something like that. Like,
so like imagine real life. Oh, you like luxury goods. What's your particular vice? Like, what are you really into?
Warhammer.
All right, there we go. Plastic.
That's super expensive.
Plastic miniatures. Now, who's your dealer? The guy from the GW store. And where's that located? Mayfield. All
Bill,
right.
He's in Mayfield.
Yeah, the Bill
super nice guy.
Bill from the GW store. Okay, but that might be an example, right? For you, for your wife, it might be Hallmark Christmas movies. Like,
oh gosh, that's funny.
But ideally, you want your vice to be something that can cause you problems, right? And
yeah, that's how I was thinking. The faith one usually, I play well in games when there is some kind of something that is behind my character that's directing them in a certain direction, and I can play on whether I need to break those vows of faith to do things. And so I've always had a very good time role playing that. So I do like this idea that there's conflict of faith when we get to the main city.
Yeah. Well, and there's also a value there because, again, if we scroll down to the bottom, we can see that if we struggle with issues from our vice or our traumas, we mark experience points. So if you can make your vice be an issue, then that is you go, hey, remember how I brought up how my faith caused me that problem? And it's like, yeah, it's like, you're right. Mark an experience point at the end of the session.
Yeah. I'm going to write in just weird.
All right.
Weird island faith.
Okay, great. Now where do you go to worship? Like, who's the purveyor of your faith?
Who's gotta be some kind of sea god or something.
But who's like your dealer? You know what I mean? Like,
oh, who's my priest?
Yeah, who's your priest? And we could just make something up randomly here. But
yeah, let's just say it's the captain of my ship or something.
All right, there we go.
Or maybe not my ship, but
yeah, so it's Captain. We'll say
Captain something.
Captain Storn. All right.
How are the names in this game? Do they get real funky?
The lore is, they try not to like put too much lore down your throat. So like, the game doesn't really have like a super detailed setting,
Okay. I was like, because people can get real weird with names.
Right.
Like if I play with my brother, every name's going to be a troll of something.
Yeah. I mean, it's a more, I would say, serious-esque game, in that respect. Generally speaking, like they give you a little bit of feedback on some of the names, but for the most part, you can make it up, be something, something exotic and weird. And, you can make it, your captain's name might be like, Zenda, or something like that, something crazy and something weird, but it's
let's go with Xavier.
All right. Xavier. Captain.
I've always liked the name Xavier.
All right, there we go. All right. Now, record your name, alias, and look. So this is just pure role playing. What's your character's name, right? Bob's PC. What's your alias? Do you have like a nickname? Like you're the Hound, right? So like, what are do you have like a pseudonym that you go by? And
yeah, is there something like off the top of your head that's like an Indiana Jones type, like an expert tracker that can get rare loot or can find people that can't be found? What's that guy from what's that freaking movie where he's like I have a particular set of skills? Oh,
Liam Neeson.
Yeah,
Taken, but that doesn't really help us.
Dang it. I was like, does he have a nickname? I'll pick my name will be Liam.
All right, yeah, there we go. I love it. All right,
just Liam. But I don't know what my alias would be, but it's got to be something like that. Yeah,
right. The wolf.
Sharks are the bloodhound of the sea. That's pretty sweet. That's pretty sweet.
You could be called. You could be called. I don't know. You could be called like the white shark.
Yeah. Or is there a
tiger shark?
Yeah, I like a shark species type. Yeah.
Or you could just be called the shark.
Yeah, it could be called the shark.
Or the barracuda.
The nose, you can smell it where the best stuff is. Mako, space shark. Get out of here, William. Better than Shart.
Yeah. Well, we'll just go with
the from 40K.
Okay. We'll just go with the shark.
Yeah, we'll stick with the shark, but I like where everyone's going. I like the shark species idea, but for now, people know me as the shark.
All right, and then look is just what does your character generally look like? What physical details do you have, and you can put that in. You maybe do you have a long. Remember now, so this game is set like imagine like Victorian kind of era England. It's like people have guns, but they're like flintlocks. They're like pretty primitive. They're not like matchlocks where they have that like burning stub, but it's like a flintlock. They have like electroplasmic lamps, but they don't really have electricity. You know what I mean? So it's kind of all over the place. Scott. Now, there's a couple other things I want to talk about on this character sheet before we. Now, believe it or not, your character is done. That's it.
Really?
Yeah, that's it. All right. So
what about like equipment and
right.
stuff?
So this is what I want to talk about. So
okay.
Your character sheet is done. So I just want to draw attention to a couple of other things about the character sheet before we finish up. Okay. So the first is if we go back down to the bottom, the middle left, right where we had the vice, that's where you can see your stress box, right? So that's going to fill up as you take stress, right? As you push yourself, as you resist consequences, as you help other people in your crew, you're going to gain stress. When that stress fills up, it'll reset to 0, but then you'll mark the first of 4 traumas.
Gotcha.
And then you'll pick one of these traumas: cold, haunted, obsessed, right? Eventually, once you have 4 traumas marked, that's it. Your character's done. All right, they're retired.
Now, I assume you try to make sense in the fiction.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, if let's say you're on a killing mission, you've been sent to kill somebody, and at the final moment, you shoot and you kill them, and you do something in the game that makes you go, over 8 stress. So your character takes a trauma, and it's like, what happens? You're like, that was the kill that broke the, I am now cold. I've become so immune to human feeling. Like I've killed so many people. My character is now just like dead inside. I'm marking cold, right? And then you can have that be a problem for you. And now that you're cold or haunted or obsessed, or maybe you say, I'm haunted by all the ghosts of the people I've killed, like they want vengeance for how many people I've racked up. That can cause problems for you. And as a result, give you experience points, right? Because remember, you earn experience points when
does anybody ever get like double of something? Like you get double haunted?
No, you pick different ones. And again, the idea is that your characters are spiraling towards the gutter, So that's the first thing I want to bring out. That's going to come up a lot during the course of the game. Right below that, we have the harm boxes. Okay. You can see that you have 2 spaces for level 1 harm, 2 spaces for level 2 harm, and a single space for level 3 harm. All right. This is where if you take harm as a consequence from one of your actions, you're going to write it into these boxes. But it could be anything, right? So like, for example, let's say you're running from a blue coat patrol, right? Blue coats are the cops.
Yep.
And you roll a 4 or 5. And I say, okay, you do it, you get away, but your character is exhausted. Type in or write exhausted as a level 1 harm.
Okay.
Right? And now you have this harm, exhausted. Now, it'll go away eventually, right? Your character will no longer be tired. But while you have the exhausted, if we look over on the right-hand side, you'll see it says less effect. So that means if your character was trying to do something and we think exhausted would maybe affect that, we would say your character is less effective than they would be. So for example, now let's say your character has to fight a group of street thugs. Okay. And I go, you're a pretty good fighter. You have standard effect. But you're exhausted, so your effect drops from standard down to limited. Remember the limited standard grade?
Yeah.
So if you have level 1 harm, that's going to make you less effective at certain actions. And it's going to be depending on, what we think of, with the GM and I.
Okay.
If you have a level 2 harm, you roll 1 less die. If that harm would matter, right?
But I'm reading this right. You can have 2 level 1s, 2 level 2s.
Correct.
What happens if you already have 2 level 1s?
Then if you take another level 1, it becomes level 2.
Okay. That's what I figured. Okay.
And if you have all 5 of the boxes filled up,
oh gosh,
it's level 4 harm, and level 4 harm is fatal. It's not on here because it kills you, right?
Yeah, exactly. I kind of gathered that.
Level 3 harm is so bad that in order to take an action, another party member has to help you, or you have to push yourself. You literally have to spend 2 stress just to take an action, just to do anything.
Jeez.
Because you're you're near death. You're completely exhausted. You're completely destroyed.
Okay. So that's good to know for level of when we're talking about you take a certain level of harm. 3 is like needing help.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
To even function. All right. Next to harm is armor. Now, if your character has armor, now armor can be, physical armor, but there's also special armor. And special armor, your playbook or something will tell you, but like maybe you have an item that gives you special armor against ghosts. And basically, while you're on a heist, if something would fuck you up and your armor matters, you can, instead of taking that consequence, instead of taking that harm, you can mark the armor instead. So
it's hurt or used, or
it's basically used up.
Oh, it's like damaged in that cancer, but beyond repair.
Well, no, because at the end, the next time you go on a heist, you get your armor back.
Oh, okay.
But during that heist, you only get 1 use of that armor.
Okay.
Now, we talked about, what about your gear? Where does this armor come from? All right, so now we're going to scroll down to the bottom right to load and equipment. Okay? This game, when you go to start a heist, okay, you never plan. You never plan your heist in this game. We just go straight into it. Okay? The only thing I'm going to ask you is, how much gear are you carrying? Are you carrying a light amount of gear, a normal amount of gear, or a heavy amount of gear? What does that matter? Well, if you're carrying a light amount of gear, your character basically looks very inconspicuous. You look like anybody off the street, If you're wearing a normal amount of gear, you look like somebody who's coming in prepared, you look like you're kind of a criminal up to some no good, like you've got, you've got a backpack on, you've got your satchel of explosives strapped around, you look kind of conspicuous. Okay. And if you're heavy, you look like somebody like coming down the street with a bazooka on their shoulder.
Yeah.
It's like you're telling everybody some shit's about to go down. That's all you decide at the start of a score. Then, during the score, as you need equipment, you just checkbox it from this list and you have it.
Oh, so you first check light, normal, heavy.
Right.
And then you can I know I have 6+, or I know I have 5.
Yep, exactly. So let's say we went with normal, which is a 5. So during the course of this next score, right, this next heist, we have 5 boxes at our disposal. We don't have to say what we have until we say that we have it.
Interesting. Okay.
So, for example, let's say, we're doing the heist and you're coming in, and then I'm like, okay, you round the corner and then you see 2 guards pull out swords and begin charging you. What do? Bob, you go, I'm going to pull out my fine pair of pistols, and I'm going to checkbox fine pair of pistols, and I'm just going to unload them before they can close. Cool. You've done that. Now you have a fine pair of pistols for this heist, but you only have 4 boxes left.
Isn't there a name for that when you have like a theoretical supply?
We call it quantum inventory.
That's what it is. Yeah. Okay.
But, as the game goes on, you might need other things. And you can, if you scroll down to the bottom, you can see that some of it is like documents, right? Burglary gear. The idea is you, Bob, are not a criminal mastermind, but your PC is. They knew what to bring. They don't literally have a bag of holding. They just
Liam has a particular set of skills.
They have a particular set of skills. You didn't know what to bring until, right? You didn't know that you needed this until you needed this, right?
So
like Bob,
some of these have two boxes
because they take 2 boxes.
Oh, it literally.
Yeah. So
you have to check both of them.
You have to check.
Okay.
Right. So if you want to pull out a large weapon, that takes 2. That takes 2 boxes.
Okay.
Right.
And why is some of this in dark?
So the stuff that's in dark is unique to your playbook.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So
that makes sense. That's kind of cool.
All the other stuff, everybody has that on their sheets.
Gotcha.
So everybody can pull out a blade or 2. Everybody can pull out a pistol. Everybody can pull out a second pistol, right? But only you can pull out a fine pair of pistols, a fine long rifle, electroplasmic ammunition, right? Only you could pull that out.
And then there's a blank spot at the bottom that's
Yeah.
like super fluff.
Yeah. So no, it's not like, you know, like maybe your crew, you know, develop something and you want to, you know, bring something else along. You can add that to your list. And now you have access to that when the shit hits
But
the
that
fan.
would be added before you ever went on the score.
Correct.
Okay, so this is more like we've developed something, we've bought something,
Right.
we found something.
We've bought something,
Okay.
we acquired something, and now we have access to it on our sheets, and we can.
Okay, I thought it was like straight like FBT, like
Nope,
make something up.
Yeah,
on the spot.
it is not.
Okay.
This game does not really have that per se.
Mhm.
Doesn't have that kind of quantum. Now, granted, your inventory is quantum, and you can pull stuff out as you need. And of course, there are no rules for any of this. What is a spirit bean charm? I have no idea. You know, but you know, if I don't know, if a bunch of vengeful ghosts were swooping in on your position and you said, hey, I'm going to pull out my spirit, you know, and a lot of times the way equipment works is equipment can, what it really does is it justifies what you're about to do in the fiction, right? It gives you the sort of fictional position and fictional strength to do something. Like, for example, you say, I'm going to command the you know, let's say you had command. All right. You say, I'm going to command the ghosts to leave. And I say, I don't know, that's pretty desperate and you're going to have limited effect. And you're like, okay, but I pull out my spirit bane charm, right? It's blessed by the gods of the deep. And I basically say like, back foul creatures, my God is stronger than any of you. And I go, oh, sweet. In the fiction, because you have the spirit bane charm, your position's still pretty desperate, but now you have great effect. The ghosts are afraid of your spirit bane, right? You know, the situation didn't get any less risky. It's still pretty desperate. But now, before you were just a guy shouting at ghosts. Now you have a spirit bane charm and you can command to them. Now, another GM might do something completely different. And that's okay. Each game of Blades in the Dark is going to be unique. What's important as a GM and as a group is that you are consistent, you know, and that you try to make it do that. So, so that's how, so when a score starts, okay, you would just pick your character's load. All right. And lastly, and I think it's just worth noting here, if we scroll over to the middle left side, you can see that there's they put this right here on the character sheet, planning. Okay. This is the only thing you do to go do a mission of crime. All right. When you choose a plan, you provide the missing detail and then the heist starts. So for example, are you assaulting? Are you deceiving? Are you stealthing? Are you using a cult? Are you using a social? Or are you using transport?
And this is decided as the group.
This is decided as a group. And then the only thing you have to do is provide the route. Okay. So let's say there's a mission and you say, you know, maybe your character goes, oh, I have a contact. Okay. I know somebody who's trying to smuggle in some illegal drugs into the city. Now their boat is coming in tomorrow. They need somebody to get the drugs past the docks, you know, past the cops and into the city and deliver it without being noticed. And I go, and you're like, you guys want to do it? And everyone goes, yeah, let's do it. Now, normally you might start playing like, okay, well, what do we need to do? How do we need to plan? You don't do that. We go, okay, so this is a transport plan, right? And everyone goes, yeah, we're transporting. And I go, okay, you need to provide me with one detail. What route are you taking? And the group goes, we're going to use the sewers. And I go, perfect. We start off, right? The crates and the shipments have been offloaded and you guys have stashed the illicit drugs in your pack and you're making your way through the sewer. And up ahead, you can, you know, and we just go right into the action. We don't do any planning. Now, your characters are very good thieves. So if you need something, like it's dark, you're in the sewers. We didn't know we were going to be in the sewers. Cool. That's cool. One of the options on the thing is lantern. I pull out a lantern. My character was ready for this.
Okay.
Right. And you're like, cool. Now you can see. Awesome. And you're like, oh, you know what? Oh man, what if my character had a map of the sewer? Great. Mark documents. You know, what if my character arranged for us to, you know, have some sort of rendezvous with somebody who could help us get the drugs into the city? Cool. You can spend stress and do a flashback to before the crime started. And it's a scene of you in the bar and you're using your sway ability to convince a cop to look the other way.
All right, go back to that. I remember this coming up before where you could flashback. So go deeper in this.
So the idea is a lot of times the reason people want to plan is because they want to deal with all these contingencies. And most of the time they don't matter. So when you get to a situation where, let's say, you know, you're trying to get into a ball that you're not invited to. and I say, okay, you get stopped at the door and someone's like, your invitations, please. And you're like, and like the group was like, we didn't think of this because we're not criminals. Also, the GM didn't even let us plan. We went straight into this. So somebody could say, hey, can we flash back to the night before and I'm forging us invitations? And I say, yeah, that sounds good. Make a finesse action roll.
Okay.
To see if you can get the details right, or make a study roll to see that you can, get all the details right. And you're like, cool. They make it, and you're like, cool. So you reach into your pocket, and you're like, yeah, we got them right here, right?
And so then that's documents.
Yep.
Okay,
well, no,
but you used a skill to produce it.
Well, in this case, maybe it's documents would be enough to just do it. You could just mark it on your sheet, and that would be enough. Or maybe like a situation where like you're in a bar and they frisk you and they take your weapons. And then you get into the bar and it's like a meeting with a rival gang. And then you realize it's an ambush and they're here to kill you. And you go, can we flash back to the night before where I snuck into this bar and I attached a gun to the bottom of this table? And then you're like, I flip backwards, reach up under the table, grab the gun and shoot the guy. And it's like, yep, you could totally do that. Make a flashback to the night before. Make a prowl roll to see if you could sneak in and set the gun. You did.
Is there a limit? Or consequence doing flashbacks?
It costs a stress.
It just costs stress. Okay.
Yeah. It costs usually 0, 1, or 2 stress. 0 stress because sometimes the GM might say, your character would totally have done that. That makes total sense. As it becomes a little bit more like implausible, you can start to make it cost more stress. But again, another way that the GM can set the tone of the game. If you make flashbacks cost 0 all the time, or maybe 1, your players are going to use them a lot and they're going to feel like, cool, like we're not getting punished for not planning. We could just make up whatever we want. But if you make them cost more expensive, then you're going to make the players have to really think twice before they use a flashback.
Now, in that exact scenario where we talked about going in the sewers through this transport route.
Yeah.
You would know that we're going to do a transport route in the sewers.
Not until you decided that at that point in time.
Okay. But we decided it.
Yep.
You already picked your loadout?
No, you just picked. Yeah. And then you would say, okay, are you picking? All right. So you guys are going to transport this stuff through the sewers, right?
Yeah.
All right. Everybody pick your load. Light, normal, or heavy.
Well, and I'm thinking, I'm like, no one's going to see us in the sewer. So I go pretty heavy.
There you go. Perfect.
That's what I was. Okay. That's what I didn't pick that beforehand.
But imagine if the scenario came up as a consequence that you were forced to leave the sewers and you had to go
surface.
And you had to go to the surface streets. And now you're like, carrying all this extra shit. That could totally come up. But your thought process there makes total sense. Similarly, if the plan was a social plan and you guys are sneaking your way into a ball and you're trying to, poison somebody, or maybe not, that would be more of a stealth thing. You're trying to sneak into a ball because you need to get information out of somebody, right? Like there's a defector and you need to get information from them, find out who's the mole, who's the traitor. Well, you can't go into there fucking locked and loaded. That would be a real problem. So a lot of people in that we're going to have to be light, because you don't have room to carry around, a lantern and a bunch of documents and a bunch of extra pistols. You might only have a couple of things concealed on your person because you're at a party.
Okay.
So
question then on obviously these scores.
Yeah.
Are when you're playing this game, does it sort of sandbox develop itself, or is there a lot of you buy like a book and it like comes with like a couple events and you sort of module off? Like I assume there's no AP for this because it's
there's almost nothing.
So you as the GM and maybe some of the players had to completely figure out what the heck you're even doing.
Yes. Now
so that could be a little tough.
Now the advantage is that the game has some rules that make it very easy to do faction-based sandbox play. Okay. The game comes with an extensive list of factions. Okay. These are basically other gangs, but also like institutions within the city, right? That can be allies or rivals to your gang. And they have,
so there's already beef or something that you kind of have.
Right. And in fact, so we were doing the character creation, right? But also typically you could do it before or after. I like to kind of do it like kind of before and then kind of after. You also create a crew.
Mm-hmm.
And a crew has its own character sheet. So you and your fellow players would decide, what kind of criminal organization are we? Are we assassins? Are we mercenaries, thugs, bravos? Are we a cult? Are we hawkers? Do we sell, vice goods? Are we thieves and spies? Are we smugglers? So your group decides what you're going to be. As you make your crew, the question will ask you some initial questions. Like, for example, you have to establish where your crew operates in the city, right? The entire city is already divided amongst larger, stronger factions. The GM will tell you which faction claims the area, and then you have to decide during character creation how to deal with them. Do you pay them off and give them a coin in exchange for giving you room to work? Do you pay the faction 2 coins as a matter of respect, but then you start with +1 status with them? Or do you keep your money, piss them off, and start with -1 status with them? So what ends up happening is when you take this action, you might say, you know what? These people sound great. We're going to give them 2 of our initial coin, and we're going to start at +1 with one of these factions. But additionally, as you continue through the character creation process, there will be something like you start with 2 upgrades. Your crew starts with 2 upgrades. Maybe you're smugglers and you have your own boat. One faction helped you get an upgrade. They like you. Take +1 status with them. One faction was screwed over when you got your upgrade. They don't like you, and you start with -2 status with them. So by the time you're done with character creation, you'll have at least 2 or 3 or 4 factions that you're either positive with or negative with. And then as a GM, all you have to look at is, well, what does this faction care about? And then they might come to you with a request, or they might start beef with you because they're feuding with you. And then you just ask the crew, all right, and what do you guys do in response? And then when the crew says, well, we're going to, I go, okay, you guys are smugglers, and you pissed off this other faction. All right. And the game starts. You're like, all right, well, what's going on? I'm like, well, that faction you pissed off, they've been bad mouthing you, and they've been telling everybody that you guys are snitches, and you guys aren't able to get any business because no one trusts you because they think that you guys are working for the cops. And it's like, what do you guys want to do? And you're like, I think we need to send this faction a message. And you're like, okay, what are you going to do? And you're like, I think we're just going to fucking beat them up. I think we're going to bust into their, is there a bar or something where they like to hang out a lot? And I go, okay, we're in downtime. This is called downtime. I go, make a gather information roll. You're like, yeah, okay. I'm going to canvass the streets. I'm going to work the streets. I'm going to study them. Right. I'm going to deal with a challenge with tracking. Right. I'm gonna tail some of these guys, find out where they hang out. I'm like, okay, cool. You find out where they hang out. It's not their headquarters, it's not like their lair, but there's a bar that they all like to go to, and they all hang out there.
Where cult members are.
Yeah, and you're like, okay, so this is like another. You're like, cool. We are going to assault that bar, and I'm like, all right, what method are you gonna do? We're kicking in the front door, and I'm like, okay. We cut to the door splinters open as you guys bust in, flintlocks and Billy, and
so that's like assault.
That's an assault. Action.
Okay.
And then
I'm picking it up.
And then we cut to you guys, you beating their ass and, sending a message. And maybe there's consequences from that. Maybe you take some stress and some harm, or maybe there's some complications. And then afterwards, we figure out what happened because of your guys' heist. Do you guys make any money? Does your reputation get better? Do you guys get in trouble with the law? Did you piss off any other factions? Probably did. Or maybe they go, we sue for peace. You guys kicked our ass. Or maybe you send a message. Or maybe they go to war with you. But then another faction says, I like the way you guys take care of business. We want to work
cut of your jib.
We like the cut of your jib. We want to work with you. And then suddenly you end up with this tangled web, and the group is going to be continually taking these actions, downtime actions. The crew's going to have their own plans, right? That they're going to try to get accomplished. And then between, we need more money. Cool. We need to go do a job. We need to score some, money, and then back to spending it and doing stuff, and then back to another job, and then so on and so forth. And that's how things quickly spiral out of control.
Okay. I was always wondering how, like, the game you play with Matt and Ross and your buddies.
Yeah.
Because you would tell me the stories. I'm like, it just seems like without direction, how did it even get to that point?
Yeah. So specific to like my last Blades in the Dark campaign, the way that the game started off is they were hawkers. So they were drug dealers. Okay. And during the course of the game, they basically, they piss somebody off, a group of smugglers, and they basically, a bunch of smugglers smuggled them in their initial load of drugs, and they screwed them over. They didn't pay them, they didn't give them a cut. So that crew is pissed off with them. And the game started, and I said, okay, yeah, that group of smugglers that you screwed over, right? They've been telling everybody that'll listen that, you guys are no good people. And I said, and what do you guys want to do? And so Holloway was like, let's burn their boat down. They're smugglers. Fuck them. Well, let's burn their boat down. And so they burned their boat down. So then that crew went to war with them, and the captain of the ship was trying to hunt them down and kill them. And then Matt was like, well, let's kill him first. So then they tracked him down and they assassinated him. Right. And then as a result of that, by the way, Matt got a complication, which is a clock was started, which was called Haunted by Captain Cobb, which was the captain that they killed. And it was like an 8 clock. And the idea was that this ghost of this murdered person that they killed was trying to track them down. And as the game continued, I kept filling in the clock, and I was like, eventually he's going to show up, and it's going to be vengeance time.
Now are ghosts like really hard to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, especially if they're physically immune to stuff, right? Unless you have the right particular thing.
Gotcha.
And what's really funny is as a result, they started dealing with a bunch of ghosts. They figured out a way that they could basically turn ghosts into drugs.
That's what I'm saying. I remember there was a point where it got real crazy.
It got real crazy. So basically, what they figured out is, by the way, we made this all up. But
that's what was so crazy to me. It just came out of nowhere.
So there's this thing called electroplasm, right? Think of it as like, it's kind of like magic electricity. But electroplasm will will consume a ghost spirit, right? And even though the ghost spirit is, it's like a Ghostbuster. Think of like the proton pack. Well, what we decide when the ghost gets destroyed, it leaves behind sort of like almost like it's being cremated.
Ash or something.
We made this up. It leaves behind ash. And we call this ash residium, like residium. And Gianna, her character was a leech, and she basically figured out a way to make that residium, that ghost ash, into a drug, a really potent drug. So they started selling this drug. But the problem is getting enough of this residium because it's very hard to get by. So they ended up making their own electroplasmic crematory, and they would like lie to ghosts and tell them that this will like bring them back to life, and then they would like incinerate them to take. But then when Captain Cobb finally showed up, all right, you ever see the Watchman movie?
Yeah.
At the end when the big floating blue guy walks into the mastermind's lair.
Yeah, he's got all the TVs and stuff,
and he like triggers that trap that disintegrates him.
Yep.
But then he's like, I can reassemble myself, and I'm a god.
Yep.
Well, they basically did that, and they set up a trap, and then Captain Cobb got lured into their electroplasmic crematory, and they burned him up and turned him into drugs.
Beautiful. That's the extra potent stuff.
Absolutely. And again, there's like a whole other thing because, in order to get the electroplasm, they had to lie to another group, and they had to create their own dummy religion to convince this other faction that they were legit, that they were actually, because they told them we worship.
Was it Matt like the leader of that cult?
Yeah, Matt became the leader of that cult, and his vice basically became like being a false prophet and like preaching to this group of people. And then at the end, they needed like this huge electroplasmic surge. So they, and then one time to cover the spirit wardens are like the high ranking government who deal with ghosts. And the spirit wardens were trying to find them because they were like, you guys are violating every law we have against ghosts. And there was another faction that was like kind of their rival faction. And the spirit wardens were honing in on them. And so then they, Gianna's character unleashed did a electroplasmic bomb that ripped a rift between the living and the dead and allowed like the end of Ghostbusters when all the ghosts get free. Like she tore open a rift into the land of the dead and let like thousands of ghosts out and killed who knows how many hundreds, if not thousands of people. And they did it all to cover their tracks and blame somebody else. And again, they were merciless. Yes. So they started so Matt started a cult initially as a cover so that another faction would believe that they weren't a group of drug dealers, that they were actually a religious group. And then eventually they figured out they needed a bunch of surge of electroplasmic energy So they convinced their cult to drink the Kool-Aid and kill themselves, and then they burned up all their ghosts. So yeah, it was pretty.
So GM Scott has a question, and
Okay.
I want you to get to that. And I know there's more to talk about here, and I know we're also running out of time, but I want to say a couple things real quick. If you're liking this, obviously like and subscribe. If you're not subscribed already, obviously like the video. If you're not part of the Patreon, you can see the link below. Obviously, join the Patreon. We talk about this stuff a lot, and we play these kind of games. Some people are playing Blades in the Dark, I'm sure now. If not, some people already were talking about doing it. Something that I've really enjoyed wanting to do. But also, if you like this kind of second look night school with Bob, let us know in the Patreon. Obviously, let us know financially if you want to tip to the videos. There's a Stream Elements link in the thing, or you can super chat us to let us know, like, yeah, this is a pretty fun content. I really appreciated this down a level to the common man help to get through, because we'll do more of these. I'm sure there's other games that I don't know anything about,
right?
That Derek can help me through and help you guys through. But if this is not something you guys are interested in, then let us know too. Maybe we can just go back to our normal routine.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let us know, do you want to see Bob and I talking about some of these, stranger games, or do you want to see me talk about Pathfinder 2, or 5e, it's one or the other. I gotta make somebody happy. I gotta get views.
That's right.
So yeah, you said GM Scott had a question.
He said, with kicking the front door and beating them up in your example, how would you handle the engagement roll?
Great.
Not much play there.
Right. So, do we have it on this sheet? No, it's on this sheet. So if you go to that cheat sheet, Bob.
Okay.
In the bottom right-hand corner, there's a thing that says engagement roll of the cheat sheet.
Okay.
You see that?
Yep.
All right. So, an engagement roll. 1, you start off with plus a die for sheer luck, right? You start with so engagement roll is a roll you make to see, all right, the heist is starting. Are we starting in a good spot? Or are we starting in a bad spot? All right.
Wait. So you make a roll with a D6?
Yep. So this is a party made roll. This is a group roll. So you start with 1 die in the pool. All right. Then you add or subtract a die if the plan is particularly bold or if the plan is overly complex. All right. You're kicking in the door, Bob, and you're going to send a message. Is that bold or overly complex?
Bold.
All right. Bold. So add a die. So there's 2 dice in the engagement pool. Okay. All right. Now add or subtract a die if you guys had aid from your friends or interference from your enemies. So this is where the GM might bring up something. The players might bring up something. Like, for example, Bob, you might say, oh, hey, I have Celine, a sentinel. She's supposed to be the guard for this place, and she's with me. So
yeah,
she happens to be on her smoke break when we show up, right? So they think that they hire her to watch over the place, but you basically have her as your as your.
I got the back. She's in my pocket.
Yeah, she's in your back pocket. You have her as a confidant, and I go, and again, make it make sense of the plan. Make it make sense in the fiction. Use what's on your sheet, and I go, yeah, that sounds great. Okay, cool. Add an extra die. 3.
What if it's both? It just cancels, maybe?
It would cancel.
Okay.
Then add a die if they're vulnerable to this. Subtract a die if they're strong against this. And I go, you know what? They're not expecting this. They're most of them are drunk. They're relaxing. They're high. They're vulnerable. You're kicking them. This isn't their stronghold. This is when they're relaxing.
Okay.
All right, cool. 4 dice.
Okay.
Are they higher or lower tier than you? Basically, is it a bigger, is a higher tier gang than you? Well, you guys are a tier 0 gang. They're a tier 1 gang. So these
lower.
So
they're higher.
They're higher.
Okay.
So subtract a die. Okay. Now you're going to roll. You had 4 dice. Now you're down to 3. You roll 3 dice. You take the highest value, a 6, a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, whatever. And if you roll a 6, then the group starts off in a controlled position. They start off in a dominant position.
This determines your position.
Yes. If you roll a 1, 2, or 3 as your highest die, you start off in a desperate position, right?
Gotcha.
So for example, and again, it's random, and we do the best that we can, but we just assume everything that needed. So for example, you kick in the door, you roll your 3 dice, you roll a 1, 1, 2. And I go, the door splinters open, you guys come in, and oh shit, all of them are here.
Yeah.
And they all stand up and just like draw their weapons and point them at you. And you're like, oh shit, that's how that's. On the other hand, if someone rolled a 6, I might say the door busts open. 2 of them are dead with slashed throats, before the others can even get out of their seats. You've already moved into the room. They're fumbling around. 2 of them are passed out drunk. None of them have any of their weapons near them at all. One of them you see is fumbling for his flintlock pistol, but he can't even get it yet. What do you do? And this is where you guys have controlled position. You just go in, execute stuff. So
do you have to do engagement rolls every time?
Every heist starts with an engagement roll.
Oh man, so there's a lot of stuff that goes into each situational role.
Exactly. And the idea is we're doing a lot of heavy lifting with that engagement roll. That engagement roll represents us, getting our supplies together, traveling across the city, finding them, kicking in the door, starting the crime, right? Like how prepared are they? What's going on inside? All of that is taken care of with 1 die roll. And then we're straight into the action, and we're, kicking ass and taking names. And then once the crime is done, cool, we're done. The heist is over. And then we go back into the downtime. We go back into the playtime until the next time it's ready for a heist. And
interesting.
And again, this is also where as a player, you want to use what you have in the fiction to give you these bonus to the dice rolls, but there's no guarantee. And to be quite frank with you, it doesn't really matter that much. Sure, it determines your initial position, but maybe it's awesome if you start off in a desperate position. You're like, fuck yeah, we're going to get a lot of experience. Let's go, boys.
That sounds about right.
And so, yeah, you bust in the door and now you have 10 people pointing guns in your face. You're in a desperate position, but guess what? Your character could bounce up, roll a 6 and take care of business. It could be bad for you, but it doesn't put you in a position where you can't accomplish anything. And so the game is weird. Your characters are super heroic. You know what it's like? It's like your characters are really high level, right? They have a really high attack bonus. They do a lot of damage, but they have low hit points.
Glass cannons.
They're kind of glass cannons. Your characters, it's very easy for them to be awesome and successful, but man, it's easy for them to pay the price. And the game wants you to pay the price. It wants you to get fucked up. It wants you to create complications. It wants you to create problems and issues. And when you make a character, part of what you're trying to do is struggle with those issues and struggle with those things, because that's what's going to get you experience, which is going to give you the advancement that you're looking for, so that you can pick up new abilities. Like you started with Scout, but maybe you eventually want to get Sharpshooter. And we didn't really talk about this, but on the bottom of your special abilities of your Hound, there's a Veteran ability. Veteran abilities let you choose abilities from other playbooks. So you can eventually start to gain, if you really like this one ability from the Cutter or from the Slide or from the, maybe your character ends up being kind of like a ranger, kind of smooth talker. You end up picking some stuff up from the Slide playbook.
No, I like that. 2 questions that came in.
Yeah.
One from Scott and one from David.
Yeah, we'll do these as the last ones.
Yep.
Someone mentioned it earlier.
Unless you super chat.
Yes. We let's see if we've kept the streak going. Yes. No tips and no super chats this entire stream. We'd love to see it. So I got the message loud and clear. People don't like Bob. Understood. Pick it up. I'm picking up what you guys are putting down here. So GM Scott said, someone mentioned it earlier in the stream, but how do you get criticals? So if you roll double 6s on a roll. So obviously,
what does that mean?
What do you mean? What part? What does double 6s
mean?
What
is a critical in this game?
A critical means take whatever effect that you would have had and get 1 level higher than it.
Oh, you go up in effect. Okay.
You go up in effect. Yep. In fact, there's even a secret effect, right? We looked at limited, standard, and great. There's actually an effect above great called extreme.
You said there was even a secret one that was at 0.
It's 0. That's right.
So there's a 4.
But you could basically only get it through like consequences or critical hits, So yeah, that's how that works. And then David's question, is someone learning the game right now? The whole position and effect stuff is something I really can't grasp. Not sure you've already tackled that, but any hints or tips on that would be awesome. We did cover this a little bit, but the basic gist of it is position. Now remember, if you're used to D&D, you're used to thinking, how difficult would this be? And if it's more in other words, are they more likely or less likely to succeed? Is the DC higher or is the DC lower? Now, what's funny is that in D&D, for example, if I said, you need to climb this tree versus you need to climb this ice wall, you would go, okay, the DC to climb the tree is lower. The DC to climb the ice wall is higher. And thus, the character's chance, their percent chance of succeeding is lower or higher, depending on what they're doing. Because, they have a +8 bonus. They need to roll 15. Okay, they only need to roll a 7. Oh, they need to roll a 25? Okay, well, then they need to roll a 17. So that affects their chance of succeeding.
Yep. Ding, ding, ding.
The bribery worked in.
Samuel Ward tipped $3. You were talking about how Matt's vice became being this cult leader. How do you change vice?
Great question, Samuel. Happy to answer that. Also, we got a super chat. Nice, from William. Thank you, William. So Samuel, so the thing is, as part of a consequence of a, I don't know if it was an overindulgence or if it was a heat roll, but basically Matt's character got you lose your vice purveyor. Okay. And what actually happened was that Matt was a part of a church, but he was a follower. And his vice was that he, basically they were like a con artist and he was just giving them all his money. But he started questioning the church leader and they kicked him out. They excommunicated him. Now that happened because of a role in the game as part of the consequence from one of the actions that he took. He got kicked out. So he didn't have a way to indulge his vice. So he had to get a new vice. And so the way we did that, Samuel, is Matt started a long-term project, which is one of the things that you can do with your downtime actions. And his long-term project was start my own church. Okay. And I said, okay, it's not that hard. Make it a 6 clock. So we made a 6-segment clock. And for the next couple heists, Matt would, after each heist, he would use coin and he would use his actions and he would make sway rolls and consort rolls. And he was basically building up his own little cult. And once that clock finished, once that long-term project finished, Matt gained a new vice, which is his own church. And that represented his, and then he could relieve his stress. So that's how we handled that. William, breaking the streak. Thank you, William. Do you need the regular book to use Deep Cuts? Yes. Or does Deep Cuts has all the basic rules? No. Deep Cuts is over 100 pages, but Deep Cuts is literally some alternate rules and some different ways of thinking. You need the core rule book to still be able to play Blades.
Gotcha.
So
that's good to know.
So in D&D, we're used to thinking of, does this action increase or decrease my chance of success? That is not what happens in Blades in the Dark. In Blades in the Dark, your chance of success is constant. It's just how many dice do you roll. If you're rolling 4 dice, you're rolling 4 dice. Position is, but going back to the example of climbing, in D&D, if you failed to climb the tree or you failed to climb the ice wall, the result is the same. You just don't climb it, right? In Blades in the Dark, it's opposite. In Blades in the Dark, climbing the tree, we would say, you climb the tree, make a prowl roll. And if you roll a 6, you do it. Climb the ice wall, make the same exact prowl roll. And if you do it, you do it. Great. But climbing the ice wall might be desperate, and climbing the tree might be controlled. If you fail at climbing the ice wall, the results are going to be way worse for you than they would be if you climb the tree. So the way to think of it is not in terms of how difficult is this to do, but how bad will it be if it goes bad? That's how you have to think about position. What's the danger? What's the threat? And that's what determines the position. And effect is, if the character does what they set out to do, think of it in terms of D&D. How much damage are they going to do with this? If you're attacking in D&D terms, if you're fighting a skeleton and somebody uses a piercing weapon, like a bow and arrow, right? You might say, oh, hey, Duncan, thank you.
Duncan DT tipped $15. Love night school. Love to see more of these.
Excellent, Duncan. Thank you, everybody, for for listening to Bob's begging.
Or am I going to learn more systems?
Yeah. No. Awesome. Yeah. I think this kind of this stuff definitely is more old school Knights of Last Call. I know we have a lot of people who've been with us for many years. A lot of people know that we got our start outside of just playing Pathfinder 2 was talking about games and talking about gaming and stuff like that. So I think that's really it can be very useful and very powerful. But thank you very much for that, Duncan. We will definitely have Bob back on. There's a lot of games that he needs to learn about. So position is what happens if it goes wrong. Effect is how effective it is. Going back to D&D, you're fighting D&D. You're fighting in a crypt, and a skeleton warrior emerges, and you go, okay, all I have is my bow and arrow, or all I have is my spear. Well, everybody knows in D&D, right? Piercing weapons, skeletons are, immune to them, or they have, resistance 5. In Blades of the Dark term, you would say, okay, you could still fight this skeleton, but your effect is going to be limited. A spear is just not a good thing to use against a skeleton. All right, what if I pull out my mace or my morning hammer, a bludgeoning weapon? Oh, that is actually not only is the creature not vulnerable, not only is the creature not resistant to it, they're vulnerable to bludgeoning.
Mm-hmm.
That is going to have great effect, right? So the way to think of it is
position didn't change.
Position didn't change, right? So position is how dangerous. If this goes bad, how bad is it, right? If the skeleton is just one skeleton, maybe the position is controlled. You can't really go that bad. On the other hand, if you're outnumbered, 4-1, and the skeletons are closing in on you on every angle, if it goes bad, it's going to go really bad for you. Your character's going to get fucked up. This could be a desperate position. But now the effect is, okay, but if you succeed, how effective are you? Do you have, remember, look at the three things. Consider scale, consider quality, and consider potency, right? Oh yeah, I'm going to pull out my holy mace. Okay, cool. You have potency. You're using the right weapon. Okay, so you are going to just, crush them and do a bunch of damage. Okay, but there's 12 skeletons and there's only one of you. You're probably not going to be able to kill them all in one swing. So I'm actually going to start a clock. I'm going to start a 4 o'clock. And when the 4 o'clock is filled, all the skeletons are dead. Now, with great effect, you can tick 3 clocks. But even if you get great effect, you're not going to be able to kill all of them in one blow. You might have to make 2 actions, right? And 2 different rolls of the dice. And we'll see what happens. But if you roll low, the skeletons might rip you apart and leave you bleeding to death. But then you could say, I resist that, right? I bring up my shield, I throw them back, I swing my mace around to keep them at arm's bay, and I don't let them near me. Cool. Take some stress, avoid the harm. So, yeah. It's a very versatile system. It's one of my favorite systems of all time. And, John Harper just released a new set of rules that change up some of these assumptions. Some of them are awesome. Some of them are house rules that I myself have used in the past. Others are radical. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know how I feel about some of the rules changes yet. So I should also note that Blades in the Dark, if this sort of crime time, haunted Victorian city isn't your thing, there's a bunch of other games that use this very similar engine, and it's called Forged in the Dark. And that's the kind of the name of the system. There's games like Scum and Villainy, which is kind of like Firefly meets Star Wars. There's Band of Blades, which is like military fantasy, right? Like you're in an army and you're going and they call them, instead of heists or scores, they call them missions, right? Like
right my alley.
Like your character is literally being deployed on a mission. There's a bunch of Forged in the Dark games. One that's being played currently on our Discord is Girls by Moonlight, which is kind of like a magic girl anime trope game. And so you kind of go from basically being like, ordinary girls and ordinary, people. And then you kind of like power up and then go on an adventure, So that you have
I didn't know that was Forged in the Dark.
It is Forged in the Dark. Yeah. So, yeah, Band of Blades is essentially the novel Black Company by Glenn Campbell. If you know that, that's like the primary responsible. And to be clear, Scum and Villainy is very clearly taken from Firefly and from Star Wars. Like Scum and Villainy has a playbook called The Scoundrel, which everybody knows is what Han Solo was called. And it literally has a playbook ability called Never Tell Me the Odds, right? So it's like literally just taking that.
Yeah, I knew a lot of people played Scum and Villainy. I've always heard good things like Darth. Shout out to Darth from our channel.
Oh yeah,
like this is like an essential book that you should read to like just do RPGs in general. And I was like, I have to own it. I'm gonna buy it, so I bought it, and I just haven't read through it. And so when Derek asked me like, what would you think about a second look at something? I'm like, please make it Blades in the Dark. I won our golden mug, which we joke about is the March Madness tournament that we hold every March for the the best RPG book, and it won for our channel. And there's got to be something there, and so I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something.
It definitely, because the book is very much written as like a do what you want. I'm going to give you guidelines. I'm not going to give you strict rules, and some people find that very freeing, and some people find that very thing. But yeah, Darth also is running a Blades in the Dark X Pathfinder 2 hack called
really?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, he's been running that for years, I think, or at least over a year, maybe 2 years. I think it's called Pathfinder in the Dark or something. I don't remember what he's called, but
that's funny.
Yeah, it's a hack.
I didn't know that.
But yeah, exactly. And the other thing is this resolution system works no matter what you're doing, right? If the group gets involved with a fight on the streets, you make an action roll. If the group gets involved in a citywide pursuit to track down a killer, you make an action roll. If the group gets involved in trying to seduce a nobleman's wife into sleeping with you so that you can steal her jewels, make an action roll. Everything is handled the same way. And all three of those could easily be a heist. A lot of people imagine heist. They think I got to be stealing something. But when I played with my Blaze in the Dark group, they were hawkers. They were selling stuff. A lot of time their heists were like them going in to make a drug deal, right? Like them going in to like sell their product to a different cartel. Basically very Breaking Bad-esque, right? It wasn't always like, in fact, they only really got into violent twice, like in the entire course of the campaign. Most of what they did was social manipulation and trade negotiations, but those were still, as the game calls them,
heist is a loose word.
Heist is a loose term. In fact, the term is called a score, right? So it's like a way for you to, for you to score money, to score reputation.
That's a better way to think of it.
And if you look at it, there's assault, there's stealth. Those are the things that most people think of. But deception, social, and transport are also three of them as well. Yes, every game is a heist. When Scum and Villainy Pilot has an ability called Leaf on the Wind, that's where it draws from Firefly. Yes, Scum and Villainy is very, very clear about its sources. Luke says, I'm working on a Band of Blades hack. That's that military campaign one about a mech and its crew on a desperate crusade. That sounds awesome. That sounds actually really awesome. I agree.
So is
Scum and Villainy.
Scum and Villainy also Harper, or is that like
no? That's
okay.
Stras Asimovich, which is one of his one of John Harper's primary contributors and friends.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was gonna say because I knew that one was like the most popular. I'm like, are these third party people or is it different, just Harper doing stuff?
Yeah, it's kind of Harper's crew. I mean, there's other people out there doing their own thing. The person who just did Girls by Moonlight is, I think, kind of on their own as well. So.
Oh, okay, cool.
But they're all very interesting games. They all kind of rely on this core engine. And again, for me, it is my favorite system to run as a game master because I love having conversations with my players about the fiction and about the story that we're telling right now. I love going out of character and being like, I don't know, Bob, what do you think about this situation that your PC is in? You're like, well, on the one hand, I'm kind of, up to my eyeballs and I'm over it. But at the same time, my hound's been through this before a million times. I'm not saying I'm in a controlled position here, but I think it's more risky than desperate. My character knows the odds and he's been in this situation before. And I go, you know what? I agree with you. We're learning about your character, and sometimes it's a great excuse for your character to be like, oh yeah, listen, I grew up, getting pushed around. I've been dealing with people like this my whole life. I'm used to this. And I go, oh, that sounds totally reasonable. Your character is in a risky situation. But we also got to learn about your character, not through reading some dumb backstory, but by playing and you kind of playing into that,
I love doing that too, because as you see, even during character creation, I'm really trying to think about what my character is and does. And so even in the game, I don't mind making things a little interesting, getting into some mischief or trouble. I don't like my character to be perfect. And I've learned that a lot really since playing Legend of the Five Rings, that I can have a lot more fun being more dramatic with my PC and things happening. So that's pretty cool.
Luke says, if you go over it on stream, you can have a copy. Strauss is lending me some help. Dude, Luke, I would love to. We get stuff from people who ask us to look at their games a lot. And, sometimes it's like, how good is this? How high quality is this? But, if you're taking it serious and you have a legit product, and I love mechs. So, that's pretty cool. And I think the format of Band of Blades is really interesting, Luke. I think a lot of people don't like Band of Blades because it's very, you know what I mean, Luke, if you're obviously very tied into this because of its procedural nature. And some people feel it feels more board gamey. But I love that. And by the way, to be clear, some of the board gamey elements of Blades in the Dark are actually the things that I enjoy the most, right?
Well, you love board games.
I love board games, so I love playing a game that allows us to tell stories. And I think that's what makes this game so cool, is because Blades in the Dark, between its random rolls and the way that the payoff and the heat, because Bob, after a heist is done, right, we kind of follow this procedure to see, okay, how much trouble did you get into with the law? And there's a table and we look it up and we make a roll and maybe the cops come knocking on the door, trying to round up the usual suspects. Maybe you get thrown in, jail for a week. Or maybe people come pissed off that you blew up their bar and they want payment, or they're going to, hire some killers to take you out, right? Everything that you do has a consequence. Your character, when they indulge their vice, Bob, there's a chance that your character can overindulge in their vice and get into trouble, right? Like maybe your character ends up getting in trouble because they went gambling, they went a little too hard, and now they owe, right? They have a debt, and now somebody's coming to earn, take it out of
to the wrong. I owe money to the wrong person.
You owe money to the wrong person, and now the group's like, shit. All right, we need to come up with money quick. Does anybody have a lead on some fast cash that we could score? And then somebody might go, all right, I don't know. I have my network of connections. Let me put my ear to the ground. Let me see if I find anything. And you're like, okay, I found out about a bank transfer that's happening. The mob is moving some of their savings from this one bank to another bank, and I know the route. I know the guy who knows the route. He'll give us the information. We have to cut him in, but if we can, we can rob it, and that'll give us the money that we need. And then you can obviously see how this is going to just spiral out of control, because now suddenly everybody's pissed at you. The people you robbed from are pissed at you. The people who the money was supposed to go to are pissed at you, and now everybody's looking for you. But then somebody shows up and says, "I'm enemy with them, so the enemy of my enemy is my friend." And it just becomes this big kind of like emerging sandbox, and it's just so much fun, And we didn't really talk about the turf game, Now Eric Hansen says stories, board games. Oath by Cole Worley. He spelled it wrong. It's with an E. I'm sure he just misspelled it, but does that in spades. Eric, I love Cole Worley, and I think Oath has.
Is Oath the game we played?
Oath is the game we played at Origins.
That game was great.
Yeah. So
talking about wheeling and dealing. We had Steven from Wolf for Comment just selling stuff.
Oath has fundamentally changed the way that I look at board games, and Oath fundamentally has changed the way I look at role-playing games. I think Oath is now obviously, Eric. I'm really excited to play more Arcs. Okay,
I want to play that.
And Arcs is awesome, and I haven't even played the campaign version yet. I've only played the regular Arcs. In fact, I played with GM Scott at Gen Con. That's the first time I got to bust it out. I'm really excited about Arcs, and I'll always love Root. Obviously, you guys know me. I'm a huge Root fan.
Yeah, Root's good.
But man, Oath is so good. It is a storyboard game. And I honestly think, Eric, I think part of the reason I love Oath so much is because it reminds me of Blades in the Dark.
Really?
It reminds me of Torchbearer. Torchbearer and Blades in the Dark, to me, especially Torchbearer, but they feel like board games that you end up playing not to win, but to create stories and to create cool moments. And I
mean, you heard the story you just described. The thing was crazy. That story is amazing.
Yeah. And that all I didn't make that story. My players didn't make that story. We made it together, and the dice rolls kind of pushed us in weird, strange, uncomfortable directions. And we end up with this really fun, crazy story. And I love that. I love that creation of a narrative that none of us saw coming, and we all worked on it together. That's why I play role-playing games. And so I really should, I can't say enough good things about Oath. It's one of my favorite games, honestly, of all time. And I've played it 10 or 15 times, and I've just been amazed at the stories that come out of this relatively. I mean, it's kind of a complex board game, and you're just playing a board game. You could look at it from a distance and say, oh, it's just like Risk. You're just trying to control spaces on a map. But what ends up happening is through that game, stories are told. And that's what the game is really about. It's tricking you into playing a story. It's really good. And to that end, I love the turf game as well. My group was big into the turf game. I've also had groups that weren't as big into the turf game, Derek. I think
just gang wars.
Yep. Gang wars and taking over positions of the city and, fighting for city blocks. And, like my group, Matt and Ross and Gianna, like they ended up like acquiring several like brothels and vice dens as a way to push their product, but also as a way to make money on the back end, and they ended up like, forcing out some other gangs and taking over their territory. And it was, pretty cool. See, Galaxies in Peril is Forged in the Dark, and one day Derek will do a first look on it one day. All right. Well, one day. I know you've mentioned it before, but it's never gotten enough traction, Beowulf.
Ooh, must not be that good. Gotta vote for it.
Eric says, I need to get Arcs. Phil says, oh, Arcs. I've been hunting for that game as well. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I kickstarted it. I kickstarted the whole kit and caboodle, like the whole big thing. I've got the
Derek loves Oath.
I've got the limited edition Kickstarter miniatures pack with the extra premium minis.
Dude, let's do it over winter break. Let's get together with some people.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite games. And by the way, the reason I love ARCs is because ARCs was described to me as Risk plus Euchre. And I love Euchre. And I love, or like a war game plus Euchre. And if you've ever played Spades or Euchre or Hearts, I love trick taking games. I pretty much, my entire college experience was me playing Euchre. And as much as I love board games, and I love board games, and I love role-playing games. I mean, role-playing games to love is an understatement. Love board games, love role-playing games, love card games, love casino games. Okay, not a big fan of poker, but I love like card games. I love like Rummy, Gin Rummy. I love Euchre. I mean, when I was younger, I used to love like Egyptian Rat Screw and all this other stuff. Like, I love like a 52 card deck Hoyle. I love it. I'm a big fan of that. All right, sorry there. So Samuel says, how do you prep for a Blaze in the Dark game? And we'll just finish this up here, Bob. We'll finish at 10.
Yeah, I'm good.
So the way I prep for a Blaze in the Dark game, Samuel, is I basically just I usually start the game off with 3 factions, because the character creation process should generate 3 factions that the group is sort of dealing with. And sometimes I'll just randomly generate them, or I'll just pick one out of the list. There's a random list. There's a random table that you can use at the back of the book. And then as the group goes through, I'll look through some other factions that I think, oh, this is interesting, or I'd like to see this as a GM. I'm curious, how would this faction interact with what's going on in my campaign? And I'll introduce them as an opportunity. And I usually like to keep 2 or 3 opportunities dangling in front of the players. Someone approaches them for a favor, or someone approaches them to do a mission, or someone approaches them. Meanwhile, my players typically, they want to do their own stuff. So, a lot of times they don't even use the opportunities I present to them, because they're just busy pushing their own agenda. And you can't really prep for that. You just have to kind of go with the flow, so it's unplanned and it's emergent storytelling games, Yeah, exactly, Jim Scott. Just know the factions that are in play. There's like 27 factions in the book. You don't need to know what all of them are doing. You only need to know what 3 or 4 or 5 of them are doing, and whatever you feel comfortable with. And as long as you know what their goals are, the factions become like fronts from Powered by the Apocalypse. Each faction is trying to accomplish several goals. And you can even track that. You can even let your players know, like, here's their clock. This faction is trying to seize control of this territory. It's a 10 clock. And you can, start ticking it off. And the players can be like, do we want to help that? Do we want to stop that? Do we want to betray them? Do we want to, get paid to fuck them over? Or do we want to get paid to help them out? Or if you're like my group, do we want to get paid by both sides and screw them both over? Which is typically what my group decides to do. I think ARCs released at Gen Con, GM Scott. It was a limited release. I think they only did like 100 a day. I think they only sold 100 a day. But yeah, Leader Games is amazing. Everything they've produced has been incredible. And but Cole Worley is in a level of his own. I can't believe it. Cole Worley is why I don't design games. John Harper too. Like, actually, this is a great example. This is great. Like, they are able to think of things that feel so familiar and yet so radically innovative. It just embarrasses me. No offense to anybody out there. I mean, you guys are doing it done, but it's like, when I see all these 5e clones come out, and I'm like, good on you. I'm glad that you're making your money and you're making your, whatever, or OSR clones or OSE or whatever, new SR. But it's like, there are some people out there that are just they're changing the face of gaming, and they are doing it. And when I think about what legacy I would love to have in the gaming space, if I were to design a game, I want it to be like ARCs. When this game came out, I mean, you go watch on YouTube, you will see like a list of people being like, this changes everything. Like, gaming will never be the same again. Like, it's really crazy how much impact these people have. It's crazy. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of Leader Games. All right, Bob. Well,
yeah. Thank you for the great introduction, because I really feel like I got a good grasp, especially between position and effect. That to me, I think obviously you said it was like pretty much the base of the game.
Yeah,
I already kind of knew what clocks did, so that really I think got a good grasp. I think it's going to help me as I read through this book. Like, I can really kind of know what I need to know now. I probably don't even need to read the book. I can play, but it's nice to have a basis as I read through. I start to understand things and I can grasp things better. And I think that will help me if I get to play again. Hopefully I get to play again. I don't know if I'll run this until I've played a little bit more, but I love PBTA, and so this is kind of like that. And
yeah,
so I think I'd have a lot of fun playing it.
John Harper considers this a Powered by the Apocalypse game because it was inspired by
I could
that.
see it.
So, and again, it uses some very similar tropes, just kind of recontextualized, and you use a dice pool instead of 2d6. But if you actually look at the odds of 2d6 plus a modifier, 6 minus 7, 8, 9, 10 plus, and then you look at the odds for the dice pool, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it actually is very similar.
Interesting.
So in a way, it actually comes out to be about the same. But yeah, and like I said, I mean, I would say Blades in the Dark has been pretty static for the last, 8 years, but Deep Cuts just came out, kind of can change everything. It is a pretty big update to some of the elements of the game. You don't have to use them. In fact, he's not even saying it's a second edition. He's saying, here are different ways that you could play the game. It's modular. Here's a different way that you can take this out and put this in, because it'll give your game maybe a different feel, or maybe your group will have a better time with it or an easier time with it. I don't think there's one way that's better or another. So a lot of it comes down to what kind of style and tone of game do you want to have? Do you want to have a more gritty, grim, realistic game, or do you want to have a little bit more like fun, freewheeling? Our scoundrels are a little bit more lucky, and kind of get away with more, and that can really set the tone of your game. So, all right, well, Bob, that's going to do it for us.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Bob,
thank you everyone in the chat too that was able to participate and help out.
Yeah, and thanks everybody who popped in there at the last minute. We've been joking lately, and okay. Hey, we finished off with a tip from our man, the greatest player of all time, the G-Post.
That's right.
He tipped $10. Love this non-first look at Blades. Looking forward to running and playing this in the future.
Yeah, Boothby, I'm really looking forward to it. Boothby, this is one of the games that was most requested to be run by my gold ticket holders. So my Exalted and my Legend members. I'd love to get a Blades in the Dark game. Additionally, I asked the patrons, hey, if we were to do another sort of actual play, and by the way, that might be something that we do with the patrons instead of, or maybe the patrons plus a night or two instead of like a full group, because we don't have the studio anymore, so it's all online anyways. So why not bring some patrons on? I asked the patrons, hey, if we did that and you wanted to see a game, what kind of game would you want to see? And Fabula Ultima was, I think, near the top, but I think Blades in the Dark was the next highest.
I could see that with your GM skills, them enjoying that.
Yeah, I'm actually looking here. I'm going to scroll back really quick.
I know L5R was up there.
Yeah, I said, what game do you want to see most run by Derek, but played with fellow patrons and maybe some knights? Number 1 was Fabula Ultima, but number 2 was Blades in the Dark. Number 3 was Avatar. And so, Blades in the Dark is a great game, and it's definitely something that I want to play more and get back to the table. I've run 3 Blades in the Dark campaigns, and they've all been incredible and generated some amazingly awesome stories, and I would just love to do it, real quick here. Let's see here. Can't understate how good the game is when players get self-directed and are getting their own stuff. It just takes care of itself, Derek. And honestly, once the ball gets rolling, I usually don't have to do anything, But thank you again, Boothby. It's nice to hear from you, the G-Pote. I got to admit, every day I'm getting more excited for Origins. I think. Oh yeah,
I just got my.
I gotta get my badge. I got my hotel room. It's gonna be really great.
I just got my badge, so I'm good.
Thank you, Pathfinder, for hanging out. Anon says Deep Cuts is getting some pushback on Reddit. Pushback is weird because it's just optional module rules. I mean, I'll be the first to admit some of the rules I like, some of the rules I'm unsure about, but that's okay. Use it or lose it, I agree. It's almost a treatise on Blades, and I do agree that it, the designer notes. Actually, it's really crazy. I didn't when I did the deep first look, I didn't realize John had written some designer notes at the end, and I wish we had gone over those because I asked some questions and I had theorized some of his intentions, and he answered some of those and was like, "Oh yeah, Derek, you were right. That is why I did that." But some of them, I was like, I don't know why he did this, and he did explain it a little bit.
You've always liked those kind of things, the notes from the author.
Yeah, I like to know
explains intention.
I like to know why. I like to know why things are doing. I mean, we've talked about this before, Bob, but one of the things that I would love to do, I just don't know a way to do. I mean, look, again, thank you so much for everybody coming in here and throwing some tips our way. I was joking with Bob beforehand that we've been doing some pretty unpopular streams lately because, we're listening to the patrons and we listen to, the people who come into our chats, and I'm doing this for you all. I'm doing this for you 50, 60, 70, 80 people. And as a result, we haven't gotten a ton of, a ton of feedback and a ton of excitement. When I'm running a Pathfinder 2 stream, and I said, oh, if we meet the tip goal, we'll do another level of spells. That tends to get a lot of engagement. So when we get people who come in from our Patreon and they support us and they tip us and they say, this is the content I want to see, it's awesome. It's cool to get that kind of support. But also, the reason that we do this stuff is because of the patrons voting. So the patrons are really the best way for this to do this, and we want the channel to be about about the Patreon as much as we can.
Yeah, you've always wanted to do education,
right? Education
and entertainment,
right? And we try to do a little mix of both and try to keep things interesting, and obviously we're trying to teach people as well. So whenever I could bring Bob on, is whenever I could bring Smith on. I love to do it. One day we'll have a studio again, Bob, but till then.
It'll be Derek's basement, but it'll be a studio.
God willing, one day.
I know. You'll get a house one of these years.
There was a great house in Kirtland, Bob. I was like, I'm gonna. And then the next day, I was under contract. I said, Jesus, I can't even. It's crazy. But yeah. So thank you, Boothby. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, William. Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, everybody who hung out here. And I'm excited to see what we come to next and where we go next and what we do next.
Absolutely.
Bob, what do you got coming up on the gaming?
So I got Dragonbane coming up
you're running
on Sunday.
You're running another
that's part 2 of Shadows over Gloomshire, and then I'm going to be running, I think it's called The Path at the End of the Road, which is it's like a 2-shot for Dragonbane. If that all goes well, ideally sounds repetitive, but I'm probably going to run Path of Glory at some point for the Patreon.
That is what I wanted to ask, Bob. Are you going to run Path of Glory?
That's probably what I'm going to do. I mean, I'd love to keep. I'm hoping Ryan from the channel. He might be running some more Pirate Borg. I might get into that just to play. And then obviously whatever we end up doing on Fridays, whenever we can get the gang back together, probably after the holidays and such. If we hopefully can play something different and fun, that'd be awesome. And then I can sort of get my itch with the Dragonbane on the side. I think I'm going to run Path of Glory. I have it sitting there right above me. I want to play it. I've had a lot of fun GMing Dragonbane, and I think obviously Path at the End of the Road and Shadows of Gloomshire are more of the spooky, and I think Path of Glory is more of the mirth and mayhem.
Got it.
And so I'll have a lot more fun, with that. So I just got to figure a way to make it good, drop in, drop out, because that's the only way to make it really work.
It's the only way it really works for the patron. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you, Bob, and we'll see you next time. Thursday, we're gonna have Donnie on.
Ooh.
One of our
that's right.
One of our older patrons. And we're gonna be talking about Earth Dawn, one of my favorite games of all time. One of my first RPGs that I played that wasn't D&D, and just a tremendously awesome game. It's a little trad, but it does some really cool ways of tying the setting and the mechanics together in a way that very few games do. So we look forward to seeing you then and next time on Knights of Last Call. Good night, everybody.